Sometimes I'm gaining, then again I'm losing. Sometimes I'm rising, yes sir. Then again I'm falling. Sometimes I'm gaining, then again I'm losing. Sometimes I'm rising, yes sir. Then again I'm falling. Let Jesus work it out. Please, your Father, would work it out. Oh, let God work it out. Please, your Father, would work it out. Oh, let God work it out. Please, your Father, would work it out. Oh, let God work it out. Oh, work it out. You work it out for Mother Lisa. Sometimes I'm gaining, then again I'm losing. Sometimes I'm rising, yes sir. Then again I'm falling. Sometimes I'm gaining, then again I'm losing. Sometimes I'm rising, yes sir. Then again I'm falling. Let Jesus work it out. Please, your Father, would work it out. Oh, let God work it out. Please, your Father, would work it out. Oh, let God work it out. Please, your Father, would work it out. Oh, let God work it out. Oh, work it out. You work it out for Mother Lisa. Sometimes I'm gaining, then again I'm losing. Sometimes I'm rising, yes sir. Then again I'm falling. Sometimes I'm gaining, then again I'm losing. Sometimes I'm rising, yes sir. Then again I'm falling. Let Jesus work it out. Please, your Father, would work it out. Oh, let God work it out. Please, your Father, would work it out.
All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is Dr. Patrick Carey with Church of the Eternal Logos. And today we're going to be asking, is God an anti-Semite? In today's stream, we're actually going to be reviewing an article over on the website Orthodox Ethos. Shout out to Father Peter Heers, written by the author G.M. Davis. He's a PhD. He has a book on Antichrist or globalism, globalism and Antichrist. I'm blanking on the exact title of that book. Some of you guys have probably already read it. It's a book that I actually cited. It's a quality book. Published by Uncut Mountain Press. Well, for those of you who don't know, there's a gentleman named Robert Spencer. And no, we're not talking about Richard Spencer. If immediately your mind moved to Richard Spencer, that is not who we're talking about. Hey, something's going on with today's stream, guys. I cannot set a goal for today's stream. I'm curious. It's showing for me is it's monetized, but other people in the chat are telling me that there's no share button. Is there no share button for a lot of you guys watching on YouTube? Yes, Robert Spencer's the Islam guy. I'll explain here in just a minute, but are you guys having problems on YouTube? Like I don't know if you saw my comment in the live chat. Before we went live, usually I'm able to set a YouTube super chat goal. Not working today. It could be a YouTube glitch, could be the title of the stream already got flagged. It's a possibility. But let me know if you guys start having weird glitches. Much of our conversation, just like on our last stream, asking what is a Jew, we're gonna stay pretty theological to avoid some of the problematic areas and TOS and content creation. So anyways, yes, the point of today's stream is there is a book written by a gentleman named Robert Spencer. This is not to be confused with Richard Spencer, often described as the white supremacist or wingnut Richard Spencer. No, Robert Spencer is actually of Greek ethnicity. He is now returned back to the Greek Orthodox Church, but he is the gentleman behind Jihad Watch. He's the anti-Islamic gentleman, and some of the stuff he said about Islam and being, in regards to it being a threat, an existential threat to the West. It's hard to find a disagreement with that. So no disagreement with his polemics regarding Islam. However, interestingly enough, he just wrote a book called Antisemitism, History and Myth. It was published this year in 2025. And pretty interesting. I was spending time today trying to go through and look at what exactly his arguments are. And essentially, from what I found, I do not have the book. I will admit, we're going to be reading G.M. Davis's response. And this is why the stream is titled, Is God an Anti-Semite? Because Robert Spencer, a gentleman who claims to now be Orthodox, he converted to like the Melkite church, Catholic church, and I guess recently left the Roman Catholic Church for the Greek Orthodox Church. That's what we're told. That's according to his Wikipedia online. In fact, let me just pull that up real quick. So we all know who we're talking about here. So this is Robert Spencer. You guys may have seen him before. Again, he's famous for his anti-Islamic polemics, Jihad Watch, the Stop the Islamization of America, all of which quite supportive of. As you can see here, he was baptized Greek Orthodox, joined the Melkite Greek Catholic Church in 1984, and then just recently in 2016 left the Roman Catholic Church because his views on Islam, because Catholicism is soft on Islam. So for that reason, he left that church and then returned to the Greek Orthodox Church. However, it appears he's never been catechized properly because he's a massive Zionist. And in his book, he actually argues that anti-Semitism, though he never defines it, he never actually presents a sort of universal definition, an operating definition to be used for his response, or anti-Semitism history and myth. And it is a response against what he deems as rising anti-Semitism. And we're going to watch some videos here to actually open up. Rising anti-Semitism is occurring. And obviously, we're going to watch a very recent clip right here where he references Tucker Carlson, Nick Fuentes. So, much more recent, Candace Owens, the people that have gotten criticized quite frequently right now. So it turns out this book is basically a massive critique of Christianity in defense of what he deems as the problem of anti-Semitism. And so anti-Semitism, he claims, is this evil that has been plaguing history. And what are his claims? That are the anti-Semitic origins, at least regarding the Christian tradition. Well, the idea that the church is Israel, the most foundational theology of the church, that the church is the continuation of the Old Testament, the first covenant, and we now are in the second covenant, and that we are the continuation of Israel. So he deems that anti-Semitic. He deems the idea that Jews killed God or Jews killed Christ, or that the Pharisees and the Jewish elite were the main culprits behind Pontius Pilate's crucifixion of Christ. He deems that also one of the problems with Christianity, as it being anti-Semitic. And then he also teaches, or at least he mentions in the book, Byzantium comes up and talks about, he kind of discusses the imperial and ecclesiastical laws that restricted, and we talked about this in the last stream on What is a Jew, that restricted synagogue construction, forbade Jews from holding any public office that wielded political power over Christians, and then encouraged them to convert. So the things that we actually mentioned in our last video, What is a Jew, that the Byzantine Empire did put pressure on the Jewish communities to convert to Christianity. And there was basically an expectation amongst all Christians at that point that, of course, why wouldn't you convert to Christianity? Because the old covenant has already been fulfilled. It's like, what are we doing here? Shout out to MGM Studies. He throws in 20, says, Jesus, the original self-hating Jew. Yeah. Funny enough. So anyways, what GM Davis does in the article that we're going to be reading today, Is God an Anti-Semite, is basically presents Robert Spencer's argument and demonstrates not only how it's anti-Christian, but it would insinuate that aspects of Christianity itself, or what God actually instituted as the church, is itself anti-Semitic, asking the question, is God an anti-Semite? Because the definition that Robert Spencer uses is so general, anybody and anything. And so that's why his criticisms of Christianity in particular, I mean, he talks about how Christians basically theologize Jewish hate. And this is one of the reasons why he believes in the Trump administration, with the rise of nationalism and Christian identity, that we're also witnessing a rise of anti-Semitism. Now, he is very clear that at no point in history are the Jews responsible for any of the criticisms, any of the rebukings, any of the skepticism around some of their activities in community. I mean, he talks about Philo Alexandria. We're going to watch this little clip video here. He mentions Philo of Alexandria, a Jew, by the way, right? This is a Jewish man, a Hellenistic Jew during the first century. Never mentions that Philo is a Jew. And he condemns Philo of Alexandria because he mentioned that there are some Jews that have rituals that are secret from the public, and that some Jews are doing things that are subversive to the surrounding Greek culture. Now, that was Philo of Alexandria, who himself was a Hellenistic Jew. Robert Spencer makes it sound like this is some Christian church father institutionalizing what he deems as anti-Semitism. So we're going to watch this in just a second. But it's amazing how there is zero culpability. He thinks that there is very little historical evidence, of course, for Christians to blame Jews for anything. Now, I bring this up as just a quick little caveat. Those who maybe have already seen it. Al Goldstein, was an American pornographer best known for publishing the sex newspaper Screw in the United States. He has a pretty interesting little comment on religion. Now, he identified as an atheist Jew, but during an interview, Luke Ford wrote about a conversation with Goldstein in which Ford asked Goldstein why Jews are dramatically overrepresented in the porn industry. He answered, "The only reason that Jews are in pornography is that we think Christ sucks. Catholicism sucks. We don't believe in authoritarianism. Pornography thus becomes a way of defiling Christian culture. And as it penetrates to the very heart of the American mainstream and is no doubt consumed by those very wasps, its subversive character becomes more charged." Ford then asked, "What does it mean to you to be a Jew?" To which Goldstein responded, "It doesn't mean anything. It means that I'm called a K word. I'm not going to repeat on YouTube." Ford also asked, "Do you believe in God?" Goldstein said, "I believe in me. I'm God. Screw God. God is your need to believe in some super being. I am the super being. I am your God. Admit it. We're random. We're the flea on the butt of a dog." Now, that is just one specific case, but Spencer tries to make the case or make the claim that any argument about Jews related to finance or different aspects of European history where they engaged in certain enterprises, that these are just total conspiratorial confection that has no basis in reality. So very interesting. So with all that being said, I want to actually show you and allow Robert Spencer to present his own words, and then we're going to get into and read this entire article of G.M. Davis. Again, this is over on orthodoxethos.com, so everybody's interested in it. Here's the link right here. So if you guys want to go grab the link, there it is. Also, just want to mention to everybody before we watch these clips, if you want to support the stream, this is the last day before I'll be doing a road trip with my wife. We're getting a rental car, going down to Nashville for DebateCon, and then from there driving down to Florida for the Athens and Jerusalem conference. So if you'd like to support our trip, we please be more than happy if you would super chat through Streamlabs or Dono Chat. If you prefer to use YouTube, feel free to use YouTube. YouTube is fine as well. And if you're feeling generous, gift some Kotal Crew memberships. Would really appreciate it. VP Duh, been a Kotal Crew member for 3 months, says Robert Spencer is a Zionist. Oy vey. He very much is a Zionist. Somebody asked, when are you coming to Ireland? I'd love to come to Ireland. I got some little Irish ancestry. Never been there. I have been at the Dublin International Airport. I wouldn't consider that fully being in Ireland, but I would love to go. I've had a couple friends go, and they've said it is beautiful. They love their time over in Ireland. Someone lives in Greenwood, Indiana. Well, that's pretty close to me, the prodigal. You should go to St. Mary of Egypt Orthodox Church over at Frieden's on 135. We sold our old church, and now we are in the gymnasium of a Protestant church while we're building on our 14-acre property. So our church, we just bought 14-acre property, got big plans for the future. So as we begin to try to build a new church, we're at a Protestant church. But if you're in the area, Prodigal 33, go over to Frieden's on Sunday, St. Mary of Egypt Orthodox Church. Be happy to have you. Okay. All right. Let's watch this early clip. So we're just going to watch sections of this, and they're all captured. He's talking with some sort of dispensationalist Christian Zionist right now. And this first section is the rise of anti-Semitism. And he talks about October 7th, and then he starts getting into the origins of anti-Semitism, this evil that he claims has plagued history and the Jews, this undeserving evil of skepticism towards them and their community and some of their religious practices. So we're going to skip through here, but I want Robert Spencer to present himself. That way, I'm not mischaracterizing him before we read G.M. Davis's article. So here's the first little There's the first little bit where he's talking about the rise of anti-Semitism in America.
What'd you find out doing the research here?
Well, it goes back. A lot of people think that it started with Christianity, and there is a strain of Christian anti-Semitism that still exists. But one of the things that I found out was that anti-Semitism actually originated earlier than Christianity, and Christianity is the only form of, or the only source, we could say, of anti-Semitism that has actually repudiated it, with the mainstream understandings of the New Testament passages that historically gave rise to anti-Semitism, mostly having been, actually all of them, having been, the anti-Semitic interpretations of them having been rejected by leaders of all the major denominations, and the mainstream understandings of these passages are no longer used except by, unfortunately, a still persistent fringe. They're no longer used in an anti-Semitic manner.
So,
You know, obviously, as you guys are familiar following culture, anti-Semitism is the hottest topic to discuss. If you've been following the fallout with Shapiro and, of course, Tel Aviv Levin, their constant and persistent attack on Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, and all those, you know, obviously Fuentes, he's kind of the brunt of much of what they hate. But it's the surrounding sort of traditionally more moderate conservatives that are becoming more critical of Zionism. And it's amazing how just becoming critical of Zionism now equates you with being an anti-Semite, that you hate people, right? And is it really about hate? And even if, obviously, we're Orthodox Christians, do I believe that the Jews killed Christ? Yes. Do I believe that the church is the true Israel? Yes. Do I believe that the modern day secular, semi-secular state of Israel and the expansion of it through the Greater Israel Project and the building of the Third Temple will bring about the Antichrist? Yes, I do personally believe that, but I don't hate individual Jews. I don't hate Jews, right? So how can you say that's anti-Semitic, right? That's one of the problems with Robert Spencer, is that it is so general what he defines as anti-Semitism that anybody can be grouped in as some type of hateful, you know, Jew hater. It's like, what? We don't hate Jews? What does that have to do with anything? And in fact, calling people these names obviously is making the problem worse. And they've lost all cultural influence. We've talked about Ben Shapiro. I mean, he comes out today and is now advocating for H-1B visas. Did you guys see this? I think on his show today, Ben Shapiro, after everything that's gone on, after everything, you know, and Trump's now trying to bring in, you know, all these foreign Chinese college exchange students to get educated in America. He's defending the H-1B visa system. You know, his $100,000 really isn't as effective as some of the people in the Trump administration speculated it would be. And during all of this, Ben Shapiro then comes out and talks about how his economic political paradigm necessitates more people, and therefore he's in favor of immigration and the use of H-1B visas because it's going to bring the highest talent around the world to America. But has it really? Has it really? And so the inability to just have authentic conversations, you know, that's where I think Tucker Carlson, it's just a great measure for the temperature in society right now, because he is not overly extreme. Like anybody who's on the internet has seen real Jew hate, right? And the majority of it is not in the Christian community. Obviously, half the Protestant Christians in America are dispensationalists and quite literally worship Jews. And the gentleman here on the left of Robert Spencer, he himself is one of these people, and I've talked about, I get multiple streams on dispensationalism, the Puritans, you know, Jewish eschatology we did last stream. But because Protestantism has no sacraments, he very much worships the Jews, the Jewish people, the Jewish community, the state of Israel, as like something physical of God's promise that he can touch, because again, they have this ethereal abstract church that they're a part of, and that's why the abstract church does not supersede the nation of Israel and the temple worship. But obviously that's what we believe is Orthodox. So this is one of the things that was concerning to me, because we haven't even got into his criticisms of Christianity yet, Robert Spencer, and yet he's part of the Greek Orthodox Church. Bro, how, if you're out in the Greek Orthodox Church, can you publish a book telling people if they believe that the church is Israel, it's anti-Semitic? What? How can you tell people that the Jews killing Christ, and, you know, if it wasn't for the Jews, would Pontius Pilate killed Christ? Is Pontius Pilate not say, I am not guilty of this man's blood? Like, what? I mean, that doesn't mean you hate every modern Jew, but to basically castrate Christianity, anything related to Judaism. I mean, whoa, what? This is like totally against the tradition itself. So here's him talking a little bit more about it.
I'm trying to figure out how to ask the question. What was it about October 7th that was so obvious to so many people, but yet created an insurgence of rise of anti-Semitism?
Now, remember, October 7th was a date in which Netanyahu and the IDF was warned by Egypt, Jordan, surrounding countries in the Middle East, that there was going to be an attack. Of course, now we know that Israel allowed the attack to happen so that it would be a catalyst for them to destroy Gaza, ethnically cleanse the West Bank and Gaza, get the Arabs and the Palestinians out for the Greater Israel Project. And we know that they killed a lot of their own Israeli citizens. We know that they deliberately moved the concert so it was right next to the border region so it'd have easier access. And so it's amazing how with all these things, and of course, Charlie Kirk, one of the things he did even before he sort of changed his tune, or at least some of his thoughts regarding Israel, according to people close to him, he was already said, I've been to Israel multiple times. I know how secure that country is. There's no way the IDF and Netanyahu didn't know that an attack was going to happen before it happened. Everything is monitored. Everything's watched and secured. And it's like, well, obviously. So here we're still going. Of course, this is from April of this year. This is when his book was coming out. Can't say the Dove TV dispensational Christian channels getting tons of views. They didn't get over 1,000, but again, it's amazing to see though how disconnected some of these Zionists are from like where American culture is. Just like with Ben Shapiro talking about H-1Bs during, again, the cultural wave that we're, it's like, how disconnected are you? Anybody who's still defending the non-release of the Epstein files, being an outward Zionist. I mean, these things are basically sure cases that you're going to lose the support of the younger generation, millennials and Gen Z. I mean, it's just a fact. That's where we're at right now. So anyways, I'm done rambling.
Perry, it seems to me that it was planned, that there were powerful people who knew that the October 7th attacks were going to happen, and they were ready with a PR campaign to portray Israel as evil, as the real aggressor, as the supposed starter of the whole conflict.
No, notice how they flipped that. Yeah, we do know that Israel knew ahead of time the attack. Oh, you mean that somehow all these Westerners knew to come up and become anti-Semitic after October 7th? Gosh. I mean, it's such a total denial of everything and all the atrocities that Israel has done to the Palestinian people, and let alone destroying, I mean, major Christian artifacts, churches, communities in the Holy Land. Like, what, dude? Who's your allegiance with? Clearly, he's getting paid.
And they were ready to roll out nationwide and worldwide protests against Israel to try to turn global public opinion against the sole Jewish state. And obviously, they've been highly successful at that. That's one of the reasons why I wrote the book, because of this resurgence of anti-Semitism that we've seen around the world since October 7th. I think it's clearly carefully planned and well-financed operation. I don't know who exactly is behind it, but it seems to me to be clear that they are interested in demonizing the Jews so that they can justify another large-scale victimization of the Jewish people, such as we saw during the Holocaust.
All right, so let's go back.
So there you have it. October 7th has been the catalyst, not for the expansion of Israel and all the military activity and projects they've engaged in. No, it's so that the Jews can experience another Holocaust. People are wanting to put what are you talking about? What? I mean, you just look at domestic terrorist attacks in America, and it's all directed at mostly Christians from trans people. What are you talking about, Robert?
Robert, before we go forward, how far back does this go, anti-Semitism?
It goes back to the pre-Christian Roman Empire and to some writers, notably Philo of Alexandria, who was in the first century.
Who was a Hellenistic Jew, right? So the reason why Philo of Alexandria is of historical significance, at least for us Christians, he was a Middle Platonist. And one of the things that he discusses in his work is he was one of the first people to talk about a second power in heaven being the Logos, right? He was a Hellenistic Jew that was highly educated. And because of that, he was very familiar with Greek philosophy, very familiar with the philosophy of Logos and that concept. And he believed that when reading the Old Testament, the Torah mostly, he could perceive that word of God, the Logos, was already there. Now, he didn't have a Trinity, but he did have a sort of bi-power understanding of the God in heaven. And Dyer's talked about this. I've talked about this. There's Boy Aron's book talks about borderlines is, again, the multiple power in heaven theory. But he's a Hellenistic Jew who was beginning through his studying of Greek philosophy, seeing parallels already present in the Old Testament. And this is why Christians then find Philo of Alexandria of interest, because one, he was a Jew. Second, he was already seeing things that when we read the Gospel of John is now fully articulating. And Philo was already seeing these things as a Jew ahead of time. So that's why he's of interest, but it's also of note that Robert does not refer to him as a Jew or highlight that he was actually part of the Jewish community. He was a Hellenistic Jew. Interesting.
BC, and he and others made all these claims about how the Jews had various secret rituals that differed from the teachings of their own scriptures, that they were secretly working to subvert the non-Jewish society. And these things actually still spread, these stories still spread to this day. But it all came down to the fact that the Jews would not pay obeisance to the Roman gods, which is, of course, the same thing that the early Christians, who were largely Jews themselves, got into trouble with the Romans with as well.
Yes, but the Jews had a special agreement with the Roman Empire where they did not have to burn the incense to the emperor. They were granted a privilege. The Christians were not.
That the Romans had all these gods and room for any number of gods you wanted, but you had to worship them all. You had to agree that they were all gods. And so the Romans were perfectly willing to accept the Jewish God and the divinity of Christ himself, but it didn't work in the other direction. The Jews, neither the Jews nor the Christians were willing to accept all the Roman gods. And so the Romans, angry that they would not assimilate, began to persecute them.
Okay. I guess I have to ask a tough question here. How does Christianity play into anti-Semitism?
Well, unfortunately, there has been the idea throughout the history of the church that the Jews are the killers of Christ. And because Christ is God, they're the killers of God himself. And this charge of deicide, it's about the worst thing you can accuse somebody of doing. And it has followed them throughout history.
Well, again, doesn't mean that a Jew in the 21st century is guilty for the death of Christ, but clearly the Jewish community, what was happening at the time of Christ, were those that had eyes to see and ears to hear, were following the Messiah into the new covenant, which breaks down the distinction between Jew and Gentile. And then the other Jews that wanted to maintain what we talked about in the last stream, the particularization that God the Father uses from the time of Abraham to the time of Christ, so that we can then see through the prophecies the fulfillment of God using the Israelites as the priest for bringing forth the blessing of the entire world. But God is always the God of all nations. God is not just the God of the Jews or the Israelites. You find this multiple times in the Old Testament here. So it's quite interesting that he's claiming to actually quote scripture and say, look, the Jewish community that did not want to give up their privileged identity and refused to recognize Christ as the Messiah had a hand in his crucifixion and sort of helped Pontius Pilate execute Christ, kill God. That can be true, and obviously not condemning every person in the 21st century who identifies as a Jew as being guilty of that. That's pretty easy. But even if, again, for him, just quoting scripture and highlighting exactly what happened as a historical event is worthy of being an anti-Semite. And he's arguing that this is one of the problems of Christianity. Now, again, another one he focused on is his book is that we claim that the church is Israel. But that's literally the theology. And he argues that Christianity began to theologize the secessionism, okay, which we believe we're under a new covenant. And because of that, we theologized a way to that condone what he believed as hate towards Jews. And we don't hate Jews. What? I mean, it's just crazy. You can tell that he definitely got his 7,000 shekels.
And of course, there are a few scriptures that give rise to this. Paul says in 1 Thessalonians, or I believe it's first, it might be second, but in any case, that the Jews killed Christ. He says that basically in so many words. And in Matthew, of course, when Jesus is on the cross and Pontius Pilate says, I'm innocent. I mean, before Jesus is on the cross, when he's on trial, Pontius Pilate says, I'm innocent of this man's blood. And the Jews cry out, his blood be upon us and upon our children. Anti-Semites throughout history have said, you see, this means that all the Jews are responsible for the killing of Christ and that they all bear a special fault for it. Now, it seems to me this is in total contradiction to basic Christianity across denominations, because we're always taught, and all the churches teach, that it's our sins that put the Lord on the cross. It's because I am a bad guy that Jesus was on the cross. And it's not because of any one particular person or one particular group. It's everybody's fault and responsibility. And this is one of the reasons why he redeems all of our sins on the cross, because he as God can bear them all. So it's sin that put him there and sin he is expiating. So to blame a particular people for this contradicts that. If it's the Jews' fault, how can it be every single human being's fault, because all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God?
So I guess where it tilts my brain is I'll do a show like this. When I get done, I'll get off the air and I will hear from Christians defending what you just explained. That, and that is that the Jews don't belong, the Jews forfeited their rights, so to speak.
Oh, you mean defending the anti-Semitic idea?
Yes.
Do the Jews worship the same God that Christians do? Do they worship the Trinity? Do they worship the second person? Do they worship the Son of God? Do they worship the Logos? What about the Holy Spirit? Like, what are we talking about here? What are we talking about? That he goes online and hears people that believes in the supersession of the church, that the Jews killed Christ. I mean, that's what Jews are defined by now, is the rejection of the Christian God, of the Messiah who came. Is that not part of, I mean, explicitly, like, how theologically who they are in the 21st century? I mean, historically. What are we talking about?
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, well, there again, Perry, one of the reasons why I wrote the book, that it seemed to me these things are resurgent nowadays. We see prominent people, not just prominent people on the left, where leftist anti-Semitism has been strong for years, although largely unacknowledged. We also see it among people many of us admired and thought had sense, like Candace Owens or Tucker Carlson. It's a
Candace Owens or Tucker Carlson? The people we thought they had sense. What are they saying that's so crazy? Calling out the state of Israel? What? What? This is the modern Holocaust? What, Robert? What?
a shame that this is happening, but it needs to be confronted. And I think that we need to, as Christians especially, we need to rebuke this within the Christian community and show people how this contradicts the whole idea of the redemption that Christ won for us. That
he did, but don't you have to follow Christ to receive the grace that comes with him being your Lord and Savior? Don't you have to accept Jesus Christ into your life, into your heart, so that you can actually be saved? So how does anything what he said nullify the salvific victory of Christ? What?
If only one group put Jesus on the cross, then how is he redeeming the sins of everyone? It is the sin that put him there, and nobody is without sin.
Wow. Because part of the stuff that we're seeing today and experiencing is is an indicator, is the recent teaching that the Old Testament is insignificant. We don't need it today.
Well, that's the Marcionite heresy. You know, it was within the lifetime of disciples of the 12 apostles, that is, people who learned from Paul, from John, from Matthew, Mark, and Luke, from the 12 apostles, and they were still alive in the early year, excuse me, in the early years of the 2nd century, in the 130s, when there was a teacher named Marcion, excuse me, who rejected the Old Testament and taught that it was not the same God that was depicted in the New Testament. And this was officially rejected by the leaders of the church, including people who had learned.
Okay, but I'm Orthodox. I'm not a Marcion. And you literally, Robert, in your book, brother, you are Greek Orthodox. You literally contradict the foundational ecclesiology of the church. You contradict what the second covenant means. You contradict just literal interpretation of scripture. Like, what's the point of trying to characterize everybody who has criticism of Israel as somehow being Marcionites and rejecting the God of the Old Testament? No, the God of the Old Testament is the Trinity. What are we doing here? This is why when people dab their toes into religious dialogue that really have no theological grounding or understanding, they look incredibly foolish. It'd be like engaging in sophisticated conversation, have no background in philosophy or basic categories, basic logic. Like, you just look foolish. It'd be like engaging in a political discussion and not having watched politics in a super long time or being aware of what's going on. What are you talking about, dude? Your book is anti-Orthodox, and that's what we're going to get into in the article. Is God an anti-Semite? That's what we're going to get into now. So, guys, smash that like. Appreciate you all for being here. I see people asking me in the chat. For some reason, YouTube is not allowing me to set a super chat goal in this stream. I think for most people that are watching, the share button has been removed. So and I'm sure it has to do with the title of the stream. I was obviously being a bit provocative, but that's quite literally the title of the article we're going to be reading now. So we're literally reading an article on Is God an Anti-Semite? But yeah, I think YouTube, I think they got me with the title for today's stream. Total Gravity throws in $20. Thank you so much, Total Gravity. God bless you, man. Really appreciate the support. Brother Brevet 1881 throws in $2. Says Judaism meant well too. Well, and one of the interesting things, if you read the Old Testament, I mean, it's not like God never said he was the God of the other nations. He says that multiple times. I mean, this is why he wants Jonah to rescue Nineveh, right? He doesn't want to destroy Nineveh because the sins have, in a sense, reached the threshold of God's mercy and compassion, and he needs them to repent so that he doesn't, destroy them. And it's Jonah that doesn't want them to be saved. And it's the Israelites who are the most rebellious to God himself, if you read the Old Testament. So, I don't know. If you're biblically literate, it kind of all makes sense. Coleman B throws in 5, says, if Christianity is supposedly anti-Semitic within itself, what is the path going forward in regard to relations between Christians and Jews? Coleman, great question. According to Robert Spencer, I guess we have to change the 2,000-year theology of the church. According to him, the tradition, which he's a part of, guys, I know some people in the chat thought that Robert Spencer was Jewish. No, that man is a Greek Orthodox Christian. His ancestors are from Anatolia. According to his Wikipedia page, they were persecuted by the Turks. So no, he is Christian. He's Greek. But clearly his hatred for Islam. Okay. I'm actually not against most of his polemics against Islam, but clearly he's chosen a side regarding Islam and Judaism and is now making such explicitly pro-Zionist, pro-Jewish sentiments. I mean, that's what his book is, Antisemitism, History and Myth, that he's undermining like historic Christianity. I mean, he literally insinuates that the Byzantine Empire was anti-Semitic because of their stance on religion and their stance that Jews can't hold political power over Christians. It's like, what? What? I mean, if, like you said, if we can't even believe the base, it's not even like Christians are killing a bunch of Jews. Like, that is not happening. That is not happening at all. What is the point of trying to undermine the basic premises of our faith? That is not going to bode well. Like, that's what I don't get. They keep doing everything that is working against them, right? Ben Shapiro is losing the PR battle, and then he goes on and advocates for H-1B visas. Like Mark Levin's upset because people are calling him Tel Aviv Levin, but everything he posts is about Israel. Like, well, what are these people doing? Do they not see that it's just making it worse? Like, just stop. Leave people alone. Quit the name calling. Like, they're critical of people criticizing Israel for legitimate criticisms, but then they respond by an ad hominem calling you an anti-Semite, which most of us are not at all. We have no hatred towards anyone, but just saying factual things. I mean, how do you think people are going to respond? You call me an anti-Semite when I'm not, and I have a legitimate gripe. Like, what do you think that's going to do? Just engage in dialogue. That's the only way forward here. Is just like honest engagement and dialogue. That's, and maybe there's hope through that. I mean, that is communion. That is true communication. That's how you build community. Brother throws in another 2, says, many Jews are anti-Semitic today. Isn't that odd? Yeah, it is. I actually was thinking that today. I listened to Max Blumenthal on Judge Napolitano, and I was like, man, that dude goes harder at Israel and modern Jews than anybody. And he is Jewish. I'm not saying he's anti-Semitic. Again, because anti-Semitism itself is such a misused term. Hebrew language is part of the Semitic linguistic tree. So is Aramaic. So is Arabic. How are you anti-Semitic because you criticize Israel? That makes zero sense. Like, just based on the definitions of words. And this is what GM Davis brings up. He's like, why don't you call it Jewish hate? Why don't you call it something else? Why do you use such the broad term of anti-Semitism? So, all right, we're going to get into that. Let me do some quick housekeeping before we dive into the article. So if you guys are interested and you want to join our community, the best way to support my work is join. Oh, what is this? Oh, okay. Is to join the Logos Academy. We got monthly fitness meetings, private discussions, exclusive content, all types of stuff, private Q&As. If you want to join a men's only philosophy and theology community of like-minded individuals trying to become the best masculine version of themselves, this is men's only community. Join the Logos Academy. If you'd be interested in sponsoring a stream, I'm getting ready to go on a bit of a 10-day hiatus here to Nashville and Florida. But when I get back, I'll be diving into a handful of sponsored streams. If you have a topic you would like for me to dive into, sponsor a stream. I'll get back to you and set up the details of the topic. If anybody's interested in setting up a one-on-one session, you can do so with this link right here. Would happy to chat with you about any topic your heart desires. Interested in getting my book? Check out my website right here if you're interested in a signed author copy. Those are only hardbacks, so I only sell hardbacks through my website. But if you'd like the cheaper paperback version, you can get it right here on Amazon. And if you're interested in your overall hormonal health and interested in getting into some peptides, as I've told you guys before, I'm doing a 2-month cycle here of BPC 157. It helps rejuvenate gut lining. It's generally referred to as the Wolverine drug. It helps you heal aches and pains. I've noticed a difference. So if you'd be interested, these are pretty expensive supplements, but these are legitimate peptides, high quality peptides. If you use promo code COTEL COTEL, you will get a discount. And you can also use that same promo code over at orthodoxdepot.com if you're interested in some Orthodox items. Use promo code COTEL there as well, and you'll get a discount off prayer ropes, necklaces, icons, Orthodox study Bibles, all types of stuff. So if those are something that you'd be interested in, use promo code COTEL, COTEL, and you will get a discount. All right. Let me pull that down. Okay. Now, with that being said, let's get into our article for today. Is God an anti-Semite? So this is the main topic at hand for our discussion today. Is we're actually going to read through this entire article. It's a bit lengthy, but it's very interesting. And so this is G.M. Davis, author of Antichrist, the Fulfillment of Globalization. I told you it was globalism and Antichrist. I have this book. It's decent. I really like it. I actually cite it in my book. I just wish it had an index. That's the only thing I wish it had was an index. But good quality stuff published over by Uncut Mountain Press. And so G.M. Davis, who himself is a PhD, writes this article from September 12th, so just a couple months ago, over on the Orthodox Ethos website. And I'll share this link if anybody wants to have it themselves, where he then is criticizing Robert Spencer's book, Antisemitism, History and Myth. So we're going to go through that right now. And if you guys have any questions or comments and want to support the stream, or me kind of going out on a limb and actually doing streams on these topics, obviously it can be a bit dangerous talking about sort of edgy topics. So if you'd like to support my work, please do. I'd greatly appreciate it. MGM Studies throws in 10, says the Ariosophy stream in connection to modern anti-Jewish sentiment and American nationalism. We should show how nationalism without Jesus is just Judaism in new skin. That's a great point. That's a great point. Yeah, no, that's a, I can't really argue with that one. MGM Studies. Fair enough. I think anything without Jesus ends up a type of Antichrist spirit for sure. So, all right, let's get into the article here. G.M. Davis begins, Mr. Robert Spencer has published his 29th book entitled Antisemitism, History and Myth. Mr. Spencer is mainly known for his work on the study of Islam and jihad, though he has also published on other subjects as well, including titles such as Empire of God, How the Byzantines Saved Civilization, and from Uncut Mountain Press, his small but useful book, The Church and the Pope. Mr. Spencer, a prolific and best-selling author, also serves as director of the website Jihad Watch. Okay. And the only notable thing, the last one here, is he is a senior fellow at the Center for Security Policy and Shillman Fellow at the David Horowitz Freedom Center. So obviously the Zionism would make sense there. It would be fair to classify my treatment here of anti-Semitism as more of a limited critique rather than a true review. A proper critique would no doubt require a book unto itself. Furthermore, one imagines that the book will be reviewed elsewhere, and due to its many claims and rather want of structure, a straightforward review of its many moving parts, while simultaneously trying to extricate its core assertions, would, at least for this writer, be quite difficult. One might even describe Mr. Spencer's book as an exercise in Pilpolism, a relevant term to any investigation of Judaism and thus anti-Semitism, though Mr. Spencer never mentions it. We will have occasion, therefore, to discuss at length several of Mr. Spencer's central points with the inclusion of relevant outside quotations in order to facilitate our analysis. Mr. Spencer gives as his reason for writing anti-Semitism as follows. He states toward the end of his introduction that, quote, one of these former friends accused me of inconsistency, namely inconsistency with respect to taking Islamic doctrine and history to task, but not Judaism and Jewish history. If I did carry out such an investigation, one longtime associate insisted, I would see that what I was dismissing as anti-Semitism was justified and reasonable suspicion, and that to dismiss it as such was tantamount to dismissing concern about jihad or Islamophobia. Very well. Here, old friend, is that investigation. Furthermore, in his acknowledgement, so what is he saying? He's saying that the book Antisemitism that Robert Spencer wrote was a review of how Judaism could be a threat to Christianity, just like Islam. Of course, what it is a massive defense of all things Judaism and a critique of Islam and Christianity. Again, for those not aware, Robert Spencer is a Greek Orthodox Christian. Okay. Mr. Spencer states, the idea for this book arose from discussions with two people I had respected and admired, but not in the usual way. They know who they are, and I dedicate this book in particular to them in what somewhat quixotic hope that it will move them to reconsider their position. So they must hold what he deems as anti-Semitic positions. Oh, okay, interesting. One wonders why Mr. Spencer is reluctant to tell us about the people who prompted his writing of anti-Semitism, especially if a stated goal is to dissuade What? Oh my gosh. Okay. Uh check, check, check. Do you hear me? No audio. What? Hmm. Check, check, check. You guys hear me? Yeah, I haven't done anything different. There was no setting that was off. There was no microphone that was off. StreamYard showing that my microphone was fine the whole time. That's crazy. How the heck did that get turned off? That's crazy. Wow. All right, well, let's go back. Somebody said, when did it cut out? Back here? Dude, that's crazy. That's crazy because I can see it all on StreamYard. That's crazy. The audio on StreamYard is totally fine. It's the exact same it just was. This is YouTube messing with me. All right, let's restart here. Okay. All right. We'll start. Somebody said it began to cut out around this section here. So we can start there. We got a super chat in on Dono Chat from Bill Hicks. Throws in $5. Thank you so much, Bill. He says, excellent stream. I decided to donate through through Dono Chat so YouTube doesn't take its 30% kosher certification tax. By the way, everyone download this stream before they shut it down. Yeah, I can't believe they muted me. It's saying that my bit rate is low and my internet is totally fine. It's so funny how this stuff happens during these streams. That is so funny. That is so funny because on StreamYard, nothing changed. They fucked with my bit rate to mess up my stream. Oh my gosh. All right. All right. Well, oh, wow. Okay. Well, we're going to restart this whole thing and move forward. So we got a lot to get through. Yeah, I'm going to check the chat more often now that we're doing, most of the time I can just work through a document, but good Lord. I knew the title was going to be a little bit catchy, right? Yeah, craziest title I've ever seen. I knew it'd be a bit catchy. That was the goal, right? It was a bit clickbaity. I knew the goal or the title was probably going to catch the algo, but it is what it is. All right, let's just restart the whole thing. Let's just restart the whole article. No, we're going to restart the whole article. All right. Is God an anti-Semite? This is G.M. Davis's PhD, author of Antichrist, The Fulfillment of Globalization, a great book. As I said, I actually cited and quoted in my own book, Return to Babylon from Adam to Antichrist. This is his critique of Robert Spencer, Zionist, Orthodox Christian, and his newest book in 2025, Antisemitism, History and Myth. So we're going to, this first section here, as we read, is just kind of giving the credentials of Robert Spencer. He works under David Horowitz at the Freedom Center. He has multiple books. And we'll begin here for why Mr. Spencer claims the reason for why he wrote the book. And basically, it's what I was mentioning earlier is he is writing this book to investigate Judaism from the claims that he's heard from fellow Christians. Okay, so very interesting. Okay, Mr. Spencer gives as his reason for writing anti-Semitism as follows. He states toward the end of his introduction that, quote, one of these former friends accused me of inconsistency, namely inconsistency with respect to Islamic doctrine and history, to task, but not to Judaism and Jewish history. If I did carry out such an investigation, one longtime associate insisted, I would see that what I was dismissing as anti-Semitism was justified in reasonable suspicion, and that to dismiss it as such was tantamount to dismissing concern about jihad and Islamophobia, or jihad as Islamophobia. Very well. Here, old friend, is that investigation. So that is Robert Spencer describing why he's writing the book. So this is an investigation into Judaism, which really turns into an undermining of, okay, Islam, fair enough, but Christianity as an Orthodox Christian, as we talked about in the opening, he believes the church being Israel is anti-Semitic. The idea that the Jews were behind the crucifixion of Christ is anti-Semitic. That Jews don't worship the same God as Christians is anti-Semitic. That the Byzantine Empire not allowing Jews to build synagogues, evangelize their faith, or have political power over Christians was anti-Semitic. He specifically refers to St. John Chrysostom, St. Augustine, St. Jerome as examples of anti-Semitism. So this is what we're getting from this book, just FYI. Furthermore, in his acknowledgments, Mr. Spencer states, the idea for this book arose from discussions with two people I had respected and admired, but not in the usual way. They know who they are, and I dedicate this book in particular to them in the somewhat quixotic hope that it will move them to reconsider their position. So they're Christians, and he wants them to reconsider their position regarding Judaism. That's what it sounds like. Okay. One wonders why Mr. Spencer is reluctant to tell us about the people who prompted his writing of anti-Semitism, especially if a stated goal is to dissuade them of their views. Possible insight is provided by Mr. Spencer when he proceeds to quote Martin Niemöller's famous statement about the German failure to stand up to the National Socialists. You know, this is the famous quote, and Spencer is quoting it in his book. First, they came for the socialists. I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists. I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. We will have occasion to remark on the various laws and proposed laws to curtail anti-Semitism. Needless to say, they are not coming from Mr. Spencer, but for the alleged anti-Semites. In this case, the tide is running strongly with rather than against him, meaning the political momentum in America is certainly in step, as we've seen with the Trump administration, with tackling anti-Semitism. So Robert Spencer finds good company in his new book, Anti-Semitism in the Dock. Mr. Spencer begins with what one takes to be an anti-Semitic canard. The question at hand is whether Judaism actually teaches and condones such immoral and antisocial behavior. So, for example, would be reading the Talmud and seeing maybe what it says about goyim, non-Jewish women, the age in which a Jew may be able to attempt fornication with such entity, what it says about Jesus Christ or the Theotokos, things like that. So whether Jews believe those things, at least we can find those in the Talmud. Those are in the Talmud, right? So he says, because of the questioning of his friends, the point of his book is to question whether Judaism actually teaches or condones such immoral and antisocial behavior. Okay, fair enough. Let's see if they do. But then he says, and whether Jews have really engaged in it on a large scale in order to further shadowy goals of conquest and world domination that they have done their best to conceal, but that non-Jews have nevertheless discovered. Well, that kind of then throws it all out the window, right? Because now what you're investigating conspiracy theories about them, right? Is that what he's saying? That the point of the book is not to investigate whether they happen per se, but to investigate the conspiracies about world domination? Huh. That's strange. That doesn't seem like a strong way to present your investigation into Judaism. Um, all right. Moving forward here. The first part of this statement is in principle, at least, open to debate. True. Does Judaism teach or condone certain immoral behaviors? That you can debate. That is an objective category up for discussion. Especially with regard to concealing actions, the second part, especially in regard to concealing actions, i.e., operating as a conspiracy, is almost by definition impossible to prove. A competent conspiracy by nature remains hidden. To discover a conspiracy is to render it no longer effectively conspiratorial. In this essay, we will concentrate on the first part of Mr. Spencer's claim and whether Jews have really engaged in it on a large scale, notwithstanding shadowy goals of conquest and world domination. Okay. Many of Mr. Spencer's claims are so obvious as to not warrant a great deal of attention. Orthodox Islamic sources such as the Quran and Hadith are inadvertently anti-Jewish. Adolf Hitler and the Nazis were very, very bad people. Okay, we get it. So he's saying, examples of animosity towards Jews. Okay. We will take the space available to us to focus on Mr. Spencer's more relevant claims for Orthodox Christians, of which Mr. Spencer is one, though he does not here say so. Namely, that such luminaries as St. Augustine, St. Jerome, and St. John Chrysostom evinced anti-Semitism. What? We will have occasion to quote the Lord Jesus Christ himself in his indictment of the Jewish leadership of his day as evidence of the objective, irreducible divide that separates the Orthodox Christian and Judaic faiths. We will note the great prophet Moses and other prophets' admonitions of the ancient Israelites. We will briefly examine the disastrous Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and we will also explore in some depth the nature of the greatest bloodbath ever to befall an Orthodox Christian people, namely the Bolshevik Communist Revolution. With Mr. Spencer's polemical study of anti-Semitism in one's lap, two questions immediately spring to mind. How far in the current social/cultural atmosphere can one critique the policies of the Jewish state, the state of Israel, before one attracts the epithet anti-Semite? And two, is a critical analysis of the Judaic religion itself possible to any serious degree without attracting a reflexive accusation of anti-Semitism? Mr. Spencer's book amounts to a great deal of anti-Semitism, and it suggests the phenomenon of how the term anti-Semitism may be used against even ingenuous critics of policies of the state of Israel, and certainly anyone who approaches the third rail of Judaism itself. Mr. Spencer comes across as ambivalent when it comes to actually forbidding through law what he defines as anti-Semitic speech. Example given, denying the Holocaust, which is illegal in many European countries and has led to prison time for convicted offenders. So what is anti-Semitism? A significant omission in the book, Anti-Semitism, History and Myth, is the absence of any working definition of what anti-Semitism actually means. What is exactly anti-Semitism? Mr. Spencer seems to assume that we already know. He does mention, quote, hatred of Jews, but if anti-Semitism roughly translate to hatred of Jews, then we need to have a reasonably clear understanding of what it means to be a Jew, another term that Mr. Spencer leaves undefined. We will come to what it means to be a Jew in modern society in due course. A subject that I just discussed in my last live stream, What is a Jew? We actually document Jewish identity from creation to Abraham, Abraham to Christ, and Christ to the present day. And I compare Orthodox eschatology with Jewish eschatology. So if that's something you're interested, check out my last stream. We hit on a lot of that stuff. One is compelled to ask why the broad term anti-Semitism for something that specifically means hatred of Jews. Why not a more precise term such as anti-Judaism or Judeophobia or even miso-Judaism or miso-Jew? Anti-Semitism as a term in the public mind first made its appearance in the 19th century in the German press, long after antipathy towards Jews appeared as a historical phenomenon, and after the emancipatory policies that largely freed Jews from the ghettos, which policies became widespread throughout Western and Central Europe following the French Revolution and the First French Empire. After all, many Jews are not Semites, and most Semites are not Jews. One might also observe further that many Jews are not Zionists, and most or many Zionists are not Jews. Still, anti-Semitism is what has come down to us today and is the subject of Mr. Spencer's book. So we will continue to make reference to it, though with caution. Orthodox Christian attitudes towards the synagogue. A basic reality and our starting point for analysis of Mr. Spencer's book here on an Orthodox Christian platform is that there has always existed from the days of our Lord's sojourn on earth and the early church a fundamental disagreement and tension between the Orthodox Church and what became Rabbinic Judaism. Mr. Spencer is clearly aware of this tension, but all too readily seems willing to cast it into the bin of irrational anti-Semitism. Whenever there is a question as to who stands in the wrong, either Rabbinic Judaism or Orthodox Christianity, he invariably seems to side with the former. The Gospels themselves and many of the apostolic epistles testify to this tension, as do many of the great early church fathers. Mr. Spencer takes to task St. John Chrysostom, who stated in a series of homilies, so this is quoting St. John Chrysostom right now, "But do not be surprised that I called the Jews pitiable. They really are pitiable and miserable. When so many blessings from heaven came into their hands, they thrust them aside and were at great pains to reject them. The morning sun of justice arose for them, but they thrust aside its rays and still sit in darkness. We Orthodox Christians who were nurtured by darkness drew the light to ourselves and were freed from the gloom of their error. They were the branches of that holy root, but those branches were broken. We had no share in the root, but we did reap the fruit of godliness. From their childhood, they read the prophets, but they crucified him whom they, the prophets, had foretold. We did not hear the divine prophecies, but we did worship him of whom they prophesied. And so they are pitiful because they rejected the blessings which were sent to them, while others seized hold of these blessings and drew them to themselves. Although those Jews had been called to the adoption of sons, they fell in kinship with dogs. We who were dogs received the strength through God's grace to put aside the irrational nature which was ours and to rise to the honor of sons. How do I prove this? Christ said, quote, "It is no fair to take the children's bread and to cast it to dogs," unquote, Matthew 15:26. Christ was speaking to the Canaanite woman when he called the Jews children and the Gentiles dogs. But at any rate, the Jews say that they too adore God. God forbid that I say that. No Jew adores God. Who says so? The Son of God says so. For he said, quote, "If you were to know my Father, you would also know me. But you neither know me nor do you know my Father." John 8:19. Could I produce a witness more trustworthy than the Son of God? If then the Jews failed to know the Father, if they crucified the Son, if they thrust off the help of the Spirit, who should not make bold to declare plainly that the synagogue is a dwelling of demons, God is not worshipped there, heaven forbid. From now on, it remains a place of idolatry, but still some people pay it honor as a holy place. Many things doth he intimate by this parable of the vine dresser, in Matthew 21, verse 33 through 41. God's providence, which had been exercised towards them, the Jews, from the first, their murderous disposition from the beginning, that nothing had been admitted of whatever pertained to a heedful care of them, that even when prophets had been slain, he had not turned away from them, but had sent his very Son, that the God both of the New and of the Old Testament was one and the same, that his death should effect great blessings, that they were to endure extreme punishment for the crucifixion, and their crime, the calling of the Gentiles, the casting out of the Jews. St. John Chrysostom, homily 68 on Matthew 21. It is important to bear in mind that in the time of St. John Chrysostom, to be a Jew meant that one practiced the rabbinic Judaic religion, not simply that one was ethnically Jewish, and the two are not one and the same in our time, and the two are not one and the same in our time, 16 centuries later, more anon. St. John had in mind Judaic beliefs and practices in his homilies. So we ask, was St. John Chrysostom calling out a legitimate difference between Jews and Christians, or was he indeed proving himself anti-Semitic, as Mr. Spencer implies? Could it have been that St. John Chrysostom was concerned for the spiritual welfare of his flock, much as St. Paul had been, and regretted the Judaizing tendencies of some of his parishioners? Let us recall the words of St. Paul. For you also suffered the same things from your own countrymen, just as they did from the Judeans, who killed both Lord Jesus and their own prophets, and have persecuted us. And they do not please God and are contrary to all men, forbidding us to speak to the Gentiles that they may be saved, so as always to fill up the measure of their sins. But wrath has come upon them to the uttermost. 1 Thessalonians 2, 14 through 16. And the scathing words of the Lord himself. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you build the tombs of the prophets and adorn the monuments of the righteous, and say, quote, if we had lived in the days of our fathers, we would not have been partakers in them in the blood of the prophets. Therefore, you are witnesses against yourselves that you are sons of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up, then, the measure of your father's guilt. Serpents, broods of vipers, how can you escape the condemnation of hell? Therefore, indeed, I send you prophets, wise men, and scribes. Some of them you will kill and crucify. Some of them you will scourge in your synagogues and persecute from city to city, that you may come all the righteous bloodshed on the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Assuredly, I say to you, all things will come upon this generation. Matthew 23, verses 29 through 36. Where St. John Chrysostom and St. Paul and the Lord himself are inventing anti-Semitism? But what, one might ask, does all this have to do with Judaism today? Is it important to remember that the Pharisees of the Lord's time were the intellectual and spiritual forebearers of what became Rabbinic Judaism in the early centuries AD, and which continues to this day as, quote, classical or Orthodox Judaism? Yet, in the modern age, many Jews are not religiously observant, just as many Christians and others are not either. And one hesitates to apply these condemnations to people who neither believe nor practice the Judaic faith, even if they continue to identify as secular Jews. Thus, a brief summation of the Orthodox Christian attitude toward Judaism and its adherents, quote, do not be deceived, O Jews. Learn the saying of the prophets and understand, truly, Christ is the almighty Redeemer of the world, unquote. Judaic attitudes towards the church. As if to inculcate his more sensitive readers to what follows, Mr. Spencer introduces Princeton professor Peter Schaeffer's Jesus in the Talmud with the words, in his fascinating and groundbreaking book, the contemporary scholar Peter Schaeffer discusses passages from the Talmud that have been taken as referring to Jesus. And we must remember that in Judaism, it is the Talmud, especially the Babylonian Talmud, rather than the Old Testament, that is the ultimate authority. Quote, not only does the Talmud contain the entirety of Jewish law, from ritual law to family laws to torts, it is also a work of ethics, philosophy, biography, literature, history, and folk tales. That is Rabbi Nosson Wise. The Talmud is the prism receiving and refracting all light. This is Rabbi Jacob Nausner. Into that writing, all prior canonical writings emerge. To it, all appeal is directed. Upon it, all conclusions ultimately rest. In the language of Torah itself, study of the Torah begins as a matter of simple, ubiquitous fact. In the Talmud, and all decisions of law that expresses theology in everyday action, the Talmud forms the final statement of the Torah, mediating Scripture's rules. Jewish tradition holds that the Talmud is the oral Torah, or a verbal explanation of the laws that God gave to Moses on Mount Sinai, and that Moses taught to others. What is lesser known is that Moses and God had a good chat on the mountain that ranged far beyond what could be inscribed on the tablets that he brought with him when he climbed back down. It is in this information transmitted orally from God to Moses and then from Moses to the generation that followed him that is the basis for the Talmud. Rabbi Aaron Perry. Of course, the good chat between God and Moses was recorded at length in the book of Exodus, with its extensive instructions and commands to the Israelites rather than existing off the record in oral form as Judaic scholars would have us believe. The Old Testament tells us, quote, "So Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the judgments. And all the people answered with one voice and said, quote, all the words which the Lord has said we will do, unquote. And Moses wrote all the words of the Lord. And he rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain and 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. Then he sent young men of the children of Israel who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen to the Lord. And Moses took half the blood and put it in basins, and half the blood sprinkled on the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people. And they said, all the Lord has said we will do, and be obedient. And Moses took the blood, sprinkled it on the people, and said, this is the blood of the covenant which the Lord has made with you according to these words. Exodus 24, 3-8. In short, it was the book of the covenant, not any additional oral Torah that God sanctified with the people of Israel on Mount Sinai. Yet to read the book of Exodus seriously, as well as the rest of the Old Testament, and acknowledge the invalidity of the oral Torah would rob the rabbis of their interpretive authority. Quote, this supposed transmission of the oral Torah, the tradition of the elders from Moses to Joshua to the prophets, was challenged by Jesus Christ, who termed it not Torah, but the commandments of men which nullify irrevocably the word and doctrine of God, making the tale of the transmission itself a fraud. That is Hoffman, Judaism Discovered, page 187. Jesus answered and said to them, well, did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites, as it is written? This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me, and in vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines and commandments of men. For laying aside the commandments of God, you hold the tradition of men, the washing of pitchers and cups, and many other things, such things you do. Mark 7, 6-12. As the Talmud, these commandments of men, which Christ censored for suffocating ordinary Jews and twisting the word of God, eventually came to be nothing short of divinized in Orthodox Rabbinic Judaism. Whereas in Orthodox Christianity, God became flesh in Jesus Christ. In Orthodox Judaism, the Babylonian Talmud represents God in the flesh, not unlike the Quran in Islam, which Orthodox Muslims regard as uncreated and pre-eternal. And that is Rabbi Jacob Nelsner and Bruce Chilton, God in the World. And it was quoted in Davis's book, Antichrist, the Fulfillment of Globalization. To return to Dr. Peter Schaeffer's Jesus and the Talmud, the question arises as to what the Talmud actually teaches vis-a-vis Jesus Christ, his most pure mother, the Theotokos and ever Virgin Mary, and the church in general. Mr. Spencer asked rhetorically whether the Talmud is an absurd, ugly, and immoral book. Mr. Spencer's answer is no, but Professor Schaeffer's research belies the truth of the matter. The Talmud indeed maligns Christ, his mother, and his followers, and in truly ugly ways. Dr. Schaeffer, who is clearly not a Christian partisan, interprets the Babylonian Talmudic treatment of the church claims as a, quote, powerful counter-narrative that was meant to shake the foundations of the Christian message. For according to them, the Amorium, or rabbinic compilers of the Babylonian Talmud, Jesus was not born from a virgin, as his followers claim, but out of wedlock, the son of a whore and her Roman lover. Therefore, he could not be the Messiah of Davidic descent, let alone the Son of God. Schaeffer, page 10. And I referenced this book recently, guys. I mentioned that if you guys are interested in some of these topics, check out this book right here, Jesus and the Talmud. This is the book that they're referring to. It's not that big. It's a good read. It's a good one. It's a good one for you to have in your library. It's called Jesus in the Talmud by Dr. Peter Schaefer. And as I said, and as GM highlights, this is not some Orthodox Christian. This is a secular scholar. Okay. All right. Moving forward. Jesus Christ, the Messiah of the church and the second person of the Holy Trinity, was furthermore, according to the Talmud, quote, a bad student who rebelled against his rabbinic teacher, and accordingly, the rabbis passed upon him their harshest judgment. Not only did they entertain lewd sexual thoughts, but when rebuked by his rabbi, he became apostate and established a new cult. The message, therefore, is that the new Christian sect / religion stemmed from a failed and insubordinate rabbinical student. Chapter 3, Schaefer. Again, this book, Jesus in the Talmud. Accordingly, and one has to say shockingly, Jesus' fate consists of sitting forever in hell in boiling excrement. That's the 13th page of Schaefer's book. Quote, and that those who follow his example up until today will not, as he has promised, gain eternal life, but will share his horrible fate. So you and I will also burn in excrement. Strangely, the Talmud does not strictly deny all powers to Christ and his followers. It acknowledges what might be described as, quote, Christian magic, but it obviously condemns Christianity as possessed of any divine mandate. Quote, hence, our story ultimately conveys the message. This Jesus and his followers claim to have the keys to heaven to use their magical power with divine authorization, but they are dead wrong. The fact that heaven accepts what they do does not mean that it approves of it. On the contrary, they are tricksters and imposters who abuse their power. The real power and authority still rests with their opponents, the rabbis. Schaefer, page 62. The rabbis, the heroes of rabbinic Judaism, who hold an interpretive monopoly over the Talmud, convey an inverted interpretation of the Orthodox Christian understanding of Christ's sacrificial death that both confirms the church's teachings as well as stands the meaning of Christ's sacrifice on its head. The Babylonian Talmud affirms that, quote, yes, the Roman governor Pontius Pilate wanted to set him, Jesus, free, but we, the Jewish rabbinate, did not give in. He was a blasphemer and idolater, and although the Romans could probably not care less, we insisted that he get what he deserved. We even convinced the Roman governor, or more precisely, forced him to accept that this heretic and impostor needed to be executed, and we are proud of it. That is a quote, again, page 74 from Jesus in the Talmud from Peter Schaefer. Rabbinic pride in the role of the execution of the Lord Jesus echoes the gospel message that the Jewish leadership of their day were indeed guilty of deicide, and that their spiritual heirs, those who maintain the pride and killing of Christ, are as well. Quote, and all the people answered and said, his blood be on us and our children, unquote. Matthew 27:25. That is the verse after Pontius Pilate says, basically, I'm clean of this man's blood. I am not taking the guilt for the execution of Jesus of Nazareth. This is on you, Pharisees. This is on you guys. And that's the quote that he's referring to. Presumably, not all Jews or even Judaic believers today persist in taking, quote, pride in the killing of Jesus of Nazareth. Yet they do persist in rejecting him as the Christ. Spencer treats the charge of deicide and the cry of the Jerusalem mob that, quote, his blood be on us and our children, unquote. In a novel and peculiar way, he argues that, quote, the ancient charges of deicide, as mainstream as they were incompatible with the fundamental tenets of Christian theology, that it was the sin of all human beings that put Christ on the cross, not one particular group. That's Robert Spencer's false heretical claim. Here, he has a point, though as a matter of logic, the theological conviction in the universality of human sinfulness that underscores the crucifixion of Christ does not negate the historical reality as accounted in the Gospels and confirmed in the Babylonian Talmud, that it was the Judaic leadership of the day that was the proximate cause of the death of God on the cross. Yet, according to Spencer, the mob's apparent self-imprecation represents, quote, not an everlasting indictment of the Jews, but a statement of the mechanism of redemption. Indeed, the blood of Christ is central to the saga of redemption for all people. All people, that is, who accept Jesus as the Christ, rather than a malefactor who is wrongly condemned, executed, and who properly spends eternity in hell in circumstances one would rather not repeat. The tension between the church and rabbinic Judaism simply cannot be resolved. It is and has been a permanent reality of Orthodox Christian and Judaic relations throughout history. Neologisms such as Judeo-Christian, a phrase that happily Mr. Spencer does not employ, though one his adulants, Bat Yeor, I don't know who that is, does, whether in reference to actual religious belief or to a vaguer ethnic, simply fail to wash, or a vaguer ethic. They are really oxymorons that try to paper over the very real and irreducible differences between the two faiths for social, political, and other reasons. From an Orthodox Christian perspective, while always being guided by the Lord's command to love one another, indeed to love our enemies, there is simply no ground for compromising with the Judaic rejection of Jesus as the Christ. Indeed, to love people, including Jews, requires the unwavering affirmation that Jesus is the Christ and the Orthodox Church is his body on earth, and that means by which all people can achieve salvation through the grace of God. Anything less is a cop-out and a disservice to those outside the church who are perishing for want of true, loving Orthodox Christian witness. Next section, anti-Semitism in the Old Testament. But the tension between the church and the synagogue predated the advent of Christ and can be observed throughout the course of the Old Testament between those of the Hebrew people who kept the Lord's commands and laws and who loved him in their hearts, and those who, quote, played the harlot with other gods and bowed down to them, those who turned quickly from the way in which their fathers walked and obeying the commandments of the Lord, they did not do so, unquote. Judges 2:17. Quote, in the old days, the Jews acted impiously towards the prophets. Now they outrage the master of the prophets, unquote. That was St. John Chrysostom. The great Moses himself testified against the early Israelites and foretold their future rejection of God and his laws. He is worth quoting at some length. Quote, this is Moses. Do not think in your heart after the Lord your God has cast them out before you, saying, quote, because of my righteousness, the Lord has brought me in to possess this land. But it is because of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is driving them out before you. Therefore, understand that the Lord your God is not giving you this good land to possess because of your righteousness, for you are a stiff-necked people. Remember, do not forget how you provoked the Lord your God to wrath in the wilderness. From the day that you departed from the land of Egypt until you came to this place, you have been rebellious against the Lord. Also, in Horeb, you provoked the Lord to wrath, so that the Lord was angry enough with you to have destroyed you. When I went up into the mountain to receive the tablets of stone, the tablets of the covenant which the Lord made with you, then I stayed on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. Then the Lord said to me, arise, go down quickly from here, for your people whom you brought out of Egypt have acted corruptly. They have quickly turned aside from the way which I commanded them. They have made themselves a molded image, unquote. Furthermore, the Lord spoke to me saying, I have seen this people, and indeed they are a stiff-necked people. Let me alone, that I may destroy them and blot out their name from under heaven, and I will make you a nation mightier and greater than they. Next section, Moses. So I turned and came down from the mountain, and the mountain burned with fire, and the two tablets of the covenant were in my two hands. And I looked, and behold, and you had sinned against the Lord your God. You had made for yourselves a molded calf. You had turned aside quickly from the way in which the Lord had commanded you. Then I took the two tablets and threw them out of my two hands and broke them before your eyes. And I fell down before the Lord as at the first 40 days and 40 nights. I neither ate bread nor drank water because all of your sin which you committed in doing wickedly in the sight of the Lord to provoke him to anger. For I was afraid of the anger and hot displeasure which the Lord was angry with you to destroy you. But the Lord listened to me at that time. And the Lord was very angry with Aaron and would have destroyed him. So I prayed for Aaron also at the same time. Then I took your sin, the calf which you have made, and burned it with fire and crushed it and ground it very small until it was fine as dust. And I threw it into the brook that descended from the mountain. Also at Taberah and Massa and Kibroth and Hatva, you provoked the Lord to wrath. Likewise, when the Lord sent you from Kadesh Barnea, saying, quote, go up and possess the land which I have given to you, then you rebelled against the commandment of the Lord your God. You did not believe him or obey his voice. You have been rebellious against the Lord from the day that I knew you. Deuteronomy 9:4-24. Deuteronomy 31. And the Lord said to Moses, behold, you will rest with your fathers, and this people will rise and play the harlot with the gods of the foreigners of this land, where they go to be among them, and they will forsake me and break my covenant, which I have made with them. Then my anger shall be aroused against them in that day, and I will forsake them, and I will hide my face from them, and they shall be devoured. And many evils and troubles shall befall them, so that they will say in that day, have not these evils come upon us because our God is not among us? And I will surely hide my face in that day because of all the evil which they have done, in that they have turned to other gods. Deuteronomy 31:16-18. So it was when Moses had completed writing the words of this law in a book, again, contravening the idea of the oral Torah, when they were finished, that Moses commanded the Levites who bore the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, saying, quote, take this book of the law and put it beside the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God, that it may be there as a witness against you. For I know your rebellion and your stiff neck. If today, while I am yet alive with you, you have been rebellious against the Lord, then how much more after my death? Gather to me all the elders of your tribes and your officers, that I may speak these words in their hearing and call heaven and earth to witness against them. For I know that after my death you will become utterly corrupt and turn aside from the way which I have commanded you. And evil will befall you in the latter days, because you will do evil in the sight of the Lord, to provoke him to anger throughout the works of your hands. Deuteronomy 31:24-29. The prophet Isaiah continued in vein of Moses. Here's the prophet Isaiah. Hear, O heavens, and gibber, O earth. For the Lord has spoken. I have nourished and brought up children, and they have rebelled against me. The ox knows its owner, the donkey its master's crib, but Israel does not know. My people do not consider. Alas, sinful nation, a people laden with iniquity, a brood of evildoers, children who are corrupters. They have forsaken the Lord. They have provoked to anger the Holy One of Israel. They have turned away backward. Why should you be stricken again? You will revolt more and more. The whole head is sick, and the whole heart faints. From the sole of the foot even to the head, there is no soundness in it, but wounds and bruises, putrefying sores. They have not been closed or bound up or soothed with ointment. Isaiah 1:1-7 continues. I have stretched out my hands all day long to a rebellious people who walk in the way that is not good, according to their own thoughts, a people who provoke me to anger continually to my face. They are smoke in my nostrils, a fire that burns all day. Behold, it is written before me, I will not keep silence, but will repay, even repay into their bosom your iniquities and the iniquities of your fathers together, says the Lord, who have burned incense on the mountains and blasphemed me on the hills. Therefore, I will measure their former work into their bosom. Thus says the Lord. But you are those who forsake the Lord, who forget my holy mountain, who prepare a table for God, and who furnish a drink offering for many. Therefore, I will number you for the sword, and you shall all bow down to the slaughter. Because when I called, you did not answer. When I spoke, you did not hear, but did evil before my eyes, and chose that in which I do not delight. Therefore, says the Lord God, behold, my servant shall eat, but you shall be hungry. Behold, my servants shall drink, but you shall be thirsty. Behold, my servants shall rejoice, but you shall be ashamed. Behold, my servants shall sing for joy of heart, but you shall cry of sorrow of heart, and wail for grief of spirit. You shall leave your name as a curse to my chosen, for the Lord God will slay you and call his servants by another name, so that he who blesses himself in the earth shall bless himself in the God of truth. And he who swears in the earth shall swear by God of truth, because the former troubles are forgotten and because they are hidden from my eyes. Isaiah 65, verses 2 through 16. Thus, do the great Old Testament prophets speak of the Hebrew nation at large, not as God's chosen, but as a curse to my chosen. Mr. Spencer objects to St. John Chrysostom referring to the Jews as fit for slaughter. He refers to that as anti-Semitism in his book on page 43. But what about does he object when it is God himself through the prophet Isaiah who prophesies that, quote, I will number you for the sword and you shall all bow down to the slaughter? Is God an anti-Semite? The core faithful of the Old Testament Hebrew nation, the remnant that remained obedient to the commands of God despite the waywardness of their compatriots, the true Israel, received their Messiah in Jesus Christ during his earthly advent and became the early church. Those who rejected God in the Old Testament continued to cling to the tradition of men, according to the basic principles of the world and not according to Christ, Colossians 2:8, and became rabbinic Judaism with its traditions based in the Talmud, which was put to writing roughly between the 2nd and 5th century AD. The chosen God. Surely one of the most deleterious notions in the false Judeo-Christian cultural universe is that the Jews, as the contemporary, quote, chosen people of God, the Hebrew nation, the descendants of Abraham, was indeed chosen by God as the stewards of the divine law, and most importantly, the people from whom the Messiah, Jesus Christ, was to come. As the Lord himself affirmed, salvation is of the Jews, John 4:22. But with the rejection of Jesus as Christ, adherents to Judaism today throw away all doctrinal and soteriological connection to the one true God for the contemporary fiction of tribal chosenness. As the Lord himself affirms, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me, John 14:6. As we have tried to clarify, it is the Orthodox Church that is the chosen of God, the true Israel. Indeed, the idea that adherents to Judaism, to be differentiated from Jews more generally, are the chosen of God is exceptionally harmful to the welfare, certainly the spiritual welfare of Judaic believers. In the general context of chosenness, salvation is implied, rendering Judaic believers prone to the Protestant idea that they are, quote, saved and not in need of the salvific power of Christ and his church. The Orthodox Christian understanding of chosenness, if anything, would reject the idea of an earthly state of salvation beyond the susceptibility of being lost or changed. Those whom we know to be saved are the saints of the church, who, having run their earthly race with faith in Christ and the cultivation of virtue through the grace of God, have received their reward in paradise. Indeed, the whole Protestant heresy regarding being, quote, saved in this life probably derived from the Judaic notion of chosenness. We have so far referred to the Judaic believers as adherents of the Jewish faith in its different forms, Reformed, Conservative, Orthodox, though our emphasis has been on the latter. But it is apparent that under various historical circumstances, including today, the term Jew connotes more than explicit religious affiliation. St. Paul observes what it means to truly be a Jew. I talked about this in my last stream of what is a Jew, that in the 21st century, and really since the Enlightenment, it's a polyphonic term, which is just a fancy way of saying it's a word with multiple meanings. And so we're historically, as we talked about in that stream, the term Jew did not arise until the second exile, until the second temple. It's after the Babylonian exile, the first one, that because the Persians saw that the tribe of Judah, which controlled the temple in Jerusalem, maintained its political, cultural, traditional, and religious values the most and differentiated them from the other Persians or the other people during the exile, the other tribes assimilated much more. And so because the tribe of Judea, They did not assimilate. In Persian, they referred to people practicing, or the Israelites, because we talked about the first term is Hebrew. Abraham's referred to as a Hebrew, not a Jew or an Israelite. With his grandson Jacob, we get the term Israel. And then Israelite is used to refer to the people that are part of the Israelite nation and the 12 tribes. But Jew, the term Jew is not used until after the Babylonian exile. And that has to do with the Persian influence of how they just generally characterize all the people practicing this sort of Judaic religion. Okay. So in the 21st century, Jew now is a polyphonic term that can mean someone who observes Torah. It could mean someone who has a Jewish mother. It could mean a reformed intellectual Jew. It could mean someone who's adopted the cultural practices, a la Ivanka Trump. She is a Gentile who is converted through her marriage to Jared Kushner. So is she matrilineally Jewish? No. I don't even know if she upholds the Torah fully, but she is Jewish. So to be a Jew in the 21st century, it's a polyphonic term that can mean a lot of different things. And so here is St. Paul stating what it means to truly be a Jew. He says, "For he is not a Jew who is one outwardly, nor is circumcision that which is outward in the flesh, but he is a Jew who is one inwardly, the circumcision that is of the heart, in the spirit, not in the letter, whose praise is not from men, but from God." Romans 2:28 through 29. Though it may seem confusing in modern circumstances, for St. Paul, a true Jew is a devoted follower in his heart of God and his Christ, i.e., a faithful Orthodox Christian. The historical and social reality of the Christian era as it developed, however, has been to designate followers of Christ, the true Messiah, as, quote, Christians rather than Jews, while the latter connotes adherents of the Torah and the Talmud, which does not accept Jesus as the Christ. While bearing in mind the words of St. Paul, for our purposes, we will accept the prevalent usage of, quote, Jew to indicate followers of the Judaic religion, but instead the contemporary meaning of Jew means more than that. And again, is a term that Mr. Spencer fails to define. What is a Jew? And so the ethnic component of Jewish identity is something that is actually developed later. We talked about that in the previous stream on what is a Jew, and that the ethnic emphasis was not the same as it was during really the time before Christ. They definitely had in-group preference, and they definitely mated with each other. So obviously most Jews had Jewish mothers, but they didn't have this genetic DNA understanding of what it meant to be a Jew by, genetic lineage. That did not exist yet. So who is a Jew? The most salient example today of a definition of what it means to be a Jew is that given by the Jewish state itself, the state of Israel. The immigration law of the right to return provides that for the purposes of this application, a Jew means a person who is born of a Jewish mother or who has become converted to Judaism and who is not a member of another religion, which provides for the historic principle of the matrilineal descent. If one's mother is a Jew, then one is too, notwithstanding whether one practices one's religion or not, as long as one does not practice another. Thus, religion and spirituality blend into ethnicity and genetics in the understanding of what it means to be a Jew. Indeed, the authority of Chabad Lubavitch is the largest and fastest growing Jewish organization, affirms that even after formal conversion to another religion, one still remains a Jew. In short, one cannot stop being a Jew. One cannot reject one's Jewishness. You cannot quit. No one can throw you out, not even God. Jewishness then amounts to an irrevocable hereditary stamp, a concept strangely harmonious with much anti-Semitic thought that treats Jews in much the same manner, as a, quote, race rather than a religious body, and one totally at odds with the Orthodox Christian understanding of the efficacy of baptism, which implies a rebirth in Christ, in which one's former religious identity is literally washed away. The Israeli scholar, Professor Shlomo Sand, wrestling with the question of what it means to be a Jew on both personal and collective levels, wrote an autobiographical book entitled How I Stopped Being a Jew. Even while he rejects his status as a Jew, according to Chabad and the State of Israel, Professor Sand remains a secular Jew. Secular Jews today defined either by matrilineal descent or by possessing a Jewish self-consciousness abound, anti-Semitism, as understood by Mr. Spencer, seems to apply just as much to secular Jews who may be otherwise unrecognizable as it does to Orthodox Jews, known for their religious practices and distinctive dress and public appearance. Ironically, like many race-minded anti-Semites, Mr. Spencer seems to argue with the identification of Jewishness as racial/hereditary when he observes, quote, this is a quote from Robert Spencer's book, many of the Jews who were forced to leave Israel, i.e. the Holy Land over the centuries, did, of course, settle in various parts of Europe, but the claim that is made is that they are native Europeans with no background in the Middle East. The anti-Semitic objective here is obvious. If the Jews of today have no ethnic connection to the ancient Jews of the land of Israel, then they have no right to return and claim to be the indigenous people of the land. That's page 356. Now, obviously, as I talked about in the last stream, if you follow Arthur Koestler's 13th tribe theory, the Khazarian theory, many people do not believe that the Ashkenazis are explicitly European. Many people believe they're actually of a Turkish mix with Eastern European identity. But that's specifically regarding Ashkenaz identity. Okay, next. If we put aside the notion that God is a real estate broker, we proceed to observe that Mr. Spencer cites on December 2013 study by Behar in Human Biology that sought to refute the Khazar thesis, namely that Ashkenazi Jews of today are descendants of converts from the ancient Khazar kingdom and have little hereditary connection to the ancient Israelites. According to Mr. Spencer, Ashkenazi Jews share the greatest genetic ancestry with other Jewish populations and among non-Jewish populations, with groups from Europe and the Middle East. No particular similarity of Ashkenazi Jews to populations from the Caucasus is evident, particularly populations that most closely represent the Khazar region, which is just an outright lie. I've seen, again, that's why I'm open. I lean a little bit more towards that the Khazarian theory could be mixed with other theories about Jewish migration into Europe. But I've also seen genetic, again, who knows with the internet, everything can be so fabricated, but I've seen genetic studies that argues there is a considerable Turkish genetic component to Ashkenazi identity. So I don't know. That's where, it's really hard to prove the Khazar theory. It's interesting. It makes a lot of sense. It fits historical timelines, but yeah. Okay. The Jewish state. So the logic runs, today's Jews defined under the Jewish state law of return as those of matrilineal Jewish ancestry are indeed Jews, not because they practice Judaism or follow the laws of God as given on Mount Sinai to Moses, but because of their genetics. They have the undisputed right to live in the state of Israel, whether they are born in Tel Aviv, Moscow, or New York. Israel in the early 21st century defines itself as a state of the Jews and as the property of the Jewish people. In other words, Jews living anywhere in the world and not a possession of the ensemble of Israeli citizens residing on its soil, which is why it is appropriate to define it as an ethnocracy rather than a democracy. Shlomo Sands. Indeed, in the Jewish state, while there is Israeli citizenship, there is no Israeli nationality, only Jew, Arab, and Druze, which the former naturally taking pride of place in the world's only official Jewish state. While Israeli non-Jews are normally afforded the rights of the Jewish counterparts, in practice, they suffer various types of discrimination. Quote, most of the discrimination is, however, rather covert. Furthermore, while it is legal but not legitimate in Israel to reject publicly or act against Zionism, according to the 1985 amendment of the election law, one may not run for the Knesset or an election slate which denies Israel as the state of the Jewish people. To analogize the situation of the state of Israel for the benefit of non-Israelis and non-Jews, Ilyan Pappy wrote in 2017, imagine if in the UK or the United States, Jewish citizens or Catholics for that matter, were barred by law from living in certain villages, neighborhoods, or maybe whole towns. How can such a situation be reconciled with the notion of democracy? Thus, given the attitude towards the two Palestinian groups, the refugees and the community in Israel, the Jewish state cannot, by any stretch of the imagination, be assumed to be a democracy. But the most obvious challenge to that assumption is the ruthless Israeli attitude toward the third Palestinian group, those who lived under its direct and indirect rule since 1967 in East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. For the legal infrastructure put in place at the outset of the 1967 war, through the unquestioned absolute power of the military inside the West Bank and outside the Gaza Strip, to the humiliation of millions of Palestinians as a daily routine, the, quote, only democracy, unquote, in the Middle East behaves as a dictatorship of the worst kind. That is from his Pappy's book, 10 Myths About Israel, page 91. House demolition, blocking up houses, all in which all windows, doors, and access ways are sealed with bricks and mortar, and other forms of collective punishment are all too common in the territories under Israeli occupation, in which the Palestinians are treated as neither citizens of the Israeli state nor citizens under the protection of the rules of war. Israeli settler vigilante groups have been allowed by the government to harass, vandalize property such as homes and farms, and even to shoot randomly at Palestinians under occupation. Here's a quote from Pappy. Let's take this in stages. Firstly, assassinations, what Amnesty's report calls unlawful killings. About 15,000 Palestinians have been killed unlawfully by Israel since 1967. It's way more than that. That was as of 2015. It's way more than that. Among them were 2,000 children. Another feature of the enlightened occupation is the imprisonment without trial. Every fifth Palestinian in the West Bank and Gaza Strip has undergone such an experience. As for torture, the reliable website Middle East Monitor published a harrowing article describing the 200 methods used by the Israelis to torture Palestinians. The list is based on a UN report and a report from the Israeli human rights organization, B'Tselem. Among other methods, it includes beatings, chaining prisoners to doors for hours, pouring hot and cold water on them, pulling fingers apart, and twisting testicles. Quote, for most Israelis, these counter-arguments are irrelevant at best and malicious at worst. Both Pappy and Spencer do seem to agree that the Israeli-Palestinian peace processes, which have proceeded along its torturous and halting ways for decades, has been disastrous, though needless to say, for different reasons. And I don't know if you guys saw some of the recent controversy out of Israel, but there was a woman that was working for the Israeli government, and for one reason or another, she actually released the video of the sodomizing of a Palestinian man by multiple Israeli soldiers, and she then fled. She tried to kill herself. Apparently, that was what I was reading today. She tried to kill herself. She fled. Israel then created a manhunt for her that lasted for about a week. And then they found her, and she's now in prison. So imagine that in Israel, if you expose the fact that all the Israeli, well, not all, but many instances, the IDF has sodomized and tortured Palestinians. And this was an innocent Palestinian man. This was not Hamas. Those soldiers will actually be celebrated in Israeli culture. Meanwhile, the woman who actually exposed what they were doing, she had to flee, and now she's arrested. So go figure. Go figure. Okay. So next section, a struggle for the soul of the Jewish people. Turning to an especially relevant time in the history of Russian and world Jewry, the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, Mr. Spencer makes reference to the great Zionist Winston Churchill's 1920 essay in the London Illustrated Sunday Herald, Zionism versus Bolshevism, a struggle for the soul of the Jewish people. After treating Bolshevik communism as somehow anti-Semitic, the Bolsheviks criminalized anti-Semitism on July 26, 1918, a week after they murdered the Russian imperial family. Churchill's essay remains a helpful document to understanding the social and political dynamics surrounding the early years of Russian communism. Mr. Spencer dismisses Churchill's main point, namely that Bolshevism was essentially a Jewish phenomenon, as, quote, simply expressing common assumptions of the time, the idea that communism was a Jewish movement and that those who engineered the Russian Revolution were all Jews. That is a quote from Spencer on page 306. Now, obviously, quote, all of the Bolshevik revolutionaries were not Jews, but whether Churchill was catering to the biases of his readers remains a question that needs a serious answer. And if he was doing so, from where did those common assumptions arise and why? Could there have been truth to them? How much truth? Mr. Spencer seems willing to touch on these important questions, but not to delve into them satisfactorily. Well, obviously, we know that the Bolshevik Revolution was majority Jew. I mean, Putin went on record and said, what did he say? Like 85% of Bolshevism was a Jewish movement. Was early communism a substantially Jewish phenomenon? We will proceed with Churchill's analysis. Though a committed Judeophile, had he been writing today, Churchill would likely have attracted the epithet of anti-Semite by virtue of pointing out what was then the ongoing intra-Jewish struggle at the time between Zionism and Bolshevism, in which both political movements, Jews were heavily involved. Churchill's essay remains a document of great historical interest written by one of the 20th century's leading statesmen. Churchill very straightforwardly gives the lie to the claim that Jews, had little connection with the chaos and savagery of early communism that followed the toppling of the Russian monarch. In the November 1917 Bolshevik Revolution. Again, writing in 1920, Churchill sums up the situation in Russia, quote, "And it may be well that this astounding race of Jews may at the present time be in the actual process of producing another system of morals and philosophy, i.e. Bolshevik communism, as malevolent as Christianity was benevolent, which is not arrested, would shatter irretrievably all that Christianity had rendered possible. It would almost seem as if the gospel of Christ and the gospel of Antichrist were destined to originate among the same people, and that this mystic and mysterious race had been chosen for the supreme manifestations both of the divine and the diabolical." Churchill proceeds to applaud the lives and social contributions of what he calls national Jews, Jews who express loyalty and patriotism to the various nations in which they find residence. This at a time preceding the birth of the modern state of Israel in 1948. Then under the subheading International Jews, Churchill writes, quote, "In violent opposition to all this sphere of Jewish effort rise the schemes of the international Jews. This movement among the Jews is not new. From the days of Spartacus Weishaupt, Johann Adam Weishaupt, to those of Karl Marx, and down to Trotsky, Bela Kun, Rosa Luxemburg, and Emma Goldman, this worldwide conspiracy for the overthrow of civilization and for the reconstitution of society on the basis of arrested development, of envious malevolence, and impossible equality has been steadily growing. It played, as a modern writer, Miss Nesta Webster, has so ably shown, a definitely recognizable part in the tragedy of the French Revolution. And it has been the mainspring of every subversive movement during the 19th century. And now, at last, this band of extraordinary personalities from the underworld of the great cities of Europe and America have gripped the Russian people by their hair of their heads and have become practically the undisputed masters of that enormous empire." Churchill then proceeds under the subheading Terrorist Jews. He says, "There is no need to exaggerate the part played in the creation of Bolshevism and in the actual bringing about the Russian Revolution by these international and, for the most part, atheistical Jews. It is certainly a very great one. It probably outweighs all others. With the notable exception of Lenin, the majority of the leading figures are Jews. Moreover, the principal inspiration and driving power comes from the Jewish leaders, Thus, Tchirin, a pure Russian, is eclipsed by his nominal subordinate Litvinov and the influence of Russians like Bukharin and Lunacharsky cannot be compared to the power of Trotsky and Zinoviev, the director of the Red Citadel, or of Krasin or Radek, all Jews. In the Soviet institutions, the predominance of Jews is even more astonishing, and all the prominent, if not indeed the principal, part of the system of terrorism applied the extraordinary commissions of combating counter-revolution has been taken by Jews, and in some notable cases by Jewesses. The same evil prominence was obtained by Jews in the brief period of terror during the Bela Kun, which Bela Kun ruled in Hungary in 1919. The same phenomenon has been presented in Germany in 1918 and 19, especially in Bavaria. So far as this madness has been allowed to prey upon the temporary prostration of the German people, although in all these countries there are many non-Jews every whit as bad as the worst of the Jewish revolutionaries, the part played by the latter in proportion to their numbers in the population is astonishing. Thus, the R.T. Hone Winston, Leonard Spencer Churchill, and February 1920 statesman and future Prime Minister of Great Britain and its empire on the struggle for the soul of the Jewish people. Jews and Bolshevism. While there has been a great tendency in contemporary circles to whitewash the outstanding role Jews played in early communism and its enormous crimes, references to earlier works and primary source materials belie the reality. Indeed, even in America in the 1920s may be thought of as Jewish communism's golden age. One might also reflect on the 20th century itself as the Jewish century, a time during which emancipated Jews came both to participate in as well as to dominate many aspects of social, cultural, and political life. But it was in the higher reaches of the Russian Communist Party and government that Jewish dominance was so striking. Douglas Reed, Times of London correspondent, writes, quote, "The Central Committee of the Bolshevik Party, which wielded the supreme power, contained 3 Russians and 9 Jews. The next body in importance, the Central Committee of the Executive Commission or Secret Police, comprised of 42 Jews and 19 Russians, Letts, Georgians, and others. The Council of People's Commissars consisted of 17 Jews and 5 others. The Moscow Cheka, the secret police, was formed of 23 Jews and 13 others. Among the names of the 556 high officials of the Bolshevik state officially published in 1918 and 1919 were 458 Jews and 108 others. Among the central committees of small, supposedly socialist or non-communist parties were 55 Jews and 6 others." Russian and Soviet historian Richard Pipes says, quote, "Jews undeniably played in the Bolshevik Party and the early Soviet apparatus a role disproportionate to their share of the population. The number of Jews active in communism in Russia and abroad was striking. In Hungary, for example, they furnished 95% of the leading figures in Bela Kun's dictatorship. They also were disproportionately represented among the communists in Germany and Austria during the revolutionary upheavals in the 1918 through 1923 and in the apparatus of the Communist International. In a white paper to the British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour, stated September 17, 1918, Sir Mansfield Findlay wrote, quote, "The question who governs Russia receives a categorical reply in the simple enumeration of the responsible officials and the irresponsible Soviet government. The data contained in this pamphlet has been carefully taken from the Bolshevist official organs. The fundamental fact is incontestable. The Soviet bureaucracy is almost entirely in the hands of Jews and Jewesses, while the number of Russians who participate in the government of the Soviets is ridiculously small. It is impossible to evade this fact, which stands as a solemn warning to countries and states which claim to be Christian and which believe in national modes of existence in contradiction with the unlimited internationalism, one might today say globalization, in which the Jewish nation is in the dominant power. It is important to note that during those chaotic, bloody years of early communism and civil war, many Jews suffered the fate of so many Russian Christians, death and exile. The Russian Revolution liberated the largest Jewish community in the world. It also opened the floodgates for the greatest massacre of Jews before the Second World War. Amid the Civil War and its aftermath in 1918 through 21, once the Bolshevik rule was then consolidated, Jews entered into nearly every sphere of Russian life, while in time, much of the singular richness of Jewish cultural life in Russia was flattened, eventually obliterated. Indeed, communism, like so many revolutions, would devour its own children in time. But this in no way minimizes the central role Jews played in the crimes of early communism. And indeed, there was a serious reaction to Jewish domination of the Communist Party and security apparatus in due course. The most extreme example of which was the rise of Adolf Hitler's National Socialist Workers' Party in Germany, which leveraged politically the scepter of Jewish Bolshevism to attain supreme political power with horrifyingly destructive results for both the enemies and the constituents of the Third Reich. As an aside, when people today speak of Russian anti-Semitism in the past, they often fail to realize that most such episodes, such as the pogroms that followed the assassination of Tsar Alexander II in March of 1881, that killed 40 Jews, the infamous Kishinev pogrom in April of 1903 that killed 49 and damaged 1,500 Jewish homes, and the 1905 pogrom in Odessa, Ukraine, that killed between 400 and 800 Jews, as well as the pogroms committed during the Civil War, occurred outside the boundaries of contemporary Russia and were committed preponderantly by non-Russian nationalities. Alexander Solzhenitsyn and Bolshevism. I got to take a drink of water. Guys, smash that like. I have been reading for a minute here. You guys appreciate me making content like this, taking the risk with the TOS. Show some appreciation with the super chat over on Dono Chat, Streamlabs, or YouTube. I'm going to finish this article and then I'll come back and address all the super chats one by one. All right. Let me see real quick. All right. A significant omission from anti-Semitism is that of Alexander Solzhenitsyn's tremendous work on the history of Jews in Russia since the 1795 partition of Poland, and a book called 200 Years Together. Mr. Spencer is willing to make use of Solzhenitsyn's famous quote that, quote, gradually it was disclosed to me that the line separating good and evil passes not through states, not between classes, not between political parties either, but right through every human heart and through all human hearts. Yet he fails to mention even the existence of the great man's actual major contribution to the whole question of the history of Jewish life in Russia and the Soviet Union. Solzhenitsyn's scholarship strongly militates against the thrust of anti-Semitism, which is that anti-Semitism is exclusively the result of irrational hatred of the past of non-Jews, both individually and collectively, and has absolutely nothing to do with the religious or social fiction contributed by Judaic beliefs and actions themselves. As a testament to the persistent difficulty in examining Judaism and Jewish history, frankly and openly, the Nobel Prize winner Solzhenitsyn was unable to get 200 Years Together, originally printed in Russian in 2002, published in English during his lifetime. An English translation appeared online in 2018, which has been this critic's source. When Alexander Solzhenitsyn began to work on a book called 200 Years Together, he was criticized for what touching this taboo issue. His own comments to the press didn't help the matter, claiming 2/3 of the Cheka, the secret police in Ukraine, were Jewish. I will always differentiate between layers of Jews. One layer rushed headfirst to the revolution, another, to the contrary, was trying to stand back. The Jewish subject for a long time was considered prohibited. Lest one consider Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the modern prophet and Nobel laureate, to have been guilty of anti-Semitic impulses, it is worth recalling that he was married to a Jewish wife, with whom he raised their sons as Jews. While many ordinary Jews did not participate directly in the destruction and murders of the early Bolshevik regime, a significantly disproportionate number of the Jewish intellectual class did. And as Solzhenitsyn powerfully describes in a book of nearly 800 pages and more than 300,000 footnotes, the early communist regime in Russia could never have achieved its brutal scope and zenith without the active participation of Russian and international Jewry. The Jewish population in its mass showed a suspicious, even hostile attitude towards the Bolsheviks. But when, as a result of the revolution, it had acquired complete freedom, which fostered a real expansion of Jewish activity in the political, social, and cultural spheres, a well-organized activity to boot. It did nothing to prevent the Bolshevik Jews from occupying the key positions, and these made an exceedingly cruel use of this new power fallen into their hands. From the 40s of the 20th century onwards, the communist rule broke with international Judaism. Jews and communists became embarrassed and afraid, and they preferred to stay quiet and conceal their strong participation of Jews in the communist revolution. However, the inclinations to remember and name the phenomenon were described by the Jews themselves as purely anti-Semitic intentions. In the 1970s and the 1980s, under the pressure of new revelations, the vision of the revolutionary years was adjusted. A considerable number of voices were heard publicly. Thus, the poet Nahum Khorasvan wrote, quote, "If we make the participation of the Jews in the revolution a taboo subject, we can no longer talk about the revolution at all. There was a time when the pride of this participation was even prized. The Jews took part in the revolution and in abnormally high proportions." M. Agursky wrote on his part, quote, "The participation of the Jews in the revolution and the Civil War has not been limited to a very active engagement in the state apparatus. It has been infinitely wider. Similarly, the Israeli socialists, Sirokina Nikov, I don't know. At the beginning of the revolution, the Jews served as the foundation of the new regime. But there are also many Jewish writers who, up to this day, either deny the Jews' contribution to Bolshevism or even reject the idea rashly, or, this is the most frequent, consider it only reluctantly. However, the fact is proven. Jewish renegades have long been leaders in the Bolshevik Party, heading the Red Army in the two capitals, and later Lazar Shatskin, who also headed the International Communist Youth. All right. Next section, the Bolsheviks, willing executioners. The fact that the Bolsheviks went to great lengths to fight any anti-Semitic reaction to their increasingly brutal rule, which they regarded as a grave threat, again, going so far as to make anti-Semitism actually illegal. Solzhenitsyn estimates that some 66 million Russians, Ukrainians, Belarusians, and other nationalities within the Soviet Union perished during the Russian Civil War of 1917 to 1923. In the first decades of communism, during both its Lenin, Trotskyist, and Stalinist years, 27 million Soviet citizens, mostly Russians, would perish during the German invasion and World War II. Professor Kevin MacDonald gives a lower total figure of deaths, but notes, quote, "The Soviet government killed over 20 million of its own citizens, the vast majority in the first 25 years of its existence during the height of Jewish power. It was a, quote, state against its people, mounting murderous campaigns of collective punishment, usually involving deportation or forced starvation, against a great many ethnic groups. Although individual Jews were caught up in the Bolshevik violence, Jews were not targeted as a group." After Stalin's purges in 1937 through 38, Jewish representation in the Communist Party and its iniquitous security services declined until that time for roughly the first 20 years of its history. It may be said that Soviet communism possessed a strongly Jewish hue. Still, Jews were highly overrepresented in positions of economic and political power, as well as cultural influence, at least into the 1940s. Particularly bloody were the Bolshevik crimes against the Russian Orthodox Church. From hierarchs and clergy to ordinary Orthodox believers, millions of whom were tortured to death, shot outright, or sent to their deaths in the gulags, sold abroad. Cathedrals were dynamited. When one reflects on the staggering death toll under Jewish communism and the virtual silence on the subject in modern mass media versus the countless books, documentaries, and feature films made about the Holocaust, one becomes cognizant of an enormous contemporary cultural and intellectual disconnect. Political and cultural crimes committed by Jewish Bolsheviks against the Russian population have been widely documented, not least by the journalist Robert Wilton, Russian correspondent to the Times of London during the Bolshevik takeover and the years of the First World War leading up to it. In his book, Russia's Agony, The Last Days of the Romanovs, Wilton and his outstanding reporting have today been thrown on the ash heap of anti-Semitism, thus discarding some of the most powerful eyewitness testimony to the events that shaped the earliest communist Soviet Union. He describes Jewish involvement in the November 1917 Bolshevik takeover of the provincial government, the subsequent systematic persecution and killing of counter-revolutionaries, namely anyone suspected of monarchist sympathies or Christian faith, during the years of the Red Terror, the savage murder of the imperial family in 1918, and the early years of civil war. Quote, taken according to numbers of the Russian population, the Jews represented 1 in 10 among the commissars that rule Bolshevik Russia. They are 9 in 10. If anything, the proportion of Jews is still greater. Wilton goes out of his way to identify Jews involved in Bolshevism as pseudo-Jews, i.e. Jews who publicly had, for the most part, shed their religious sympathies and accepted the official atheism of the new regime, while culturally and in private retaining their Jewish self-consciousness, and would continue to be identified as Jews according to the principle of familial descent as still promulgated by the State of Israel and, again, ironically, by many anti-Semites. To borrow a phrase, one might say that many Jews in Russia and from all over the world who flocked to the nascent Bolshevik regime, who lent themselves to the gruesome machinery of early communism, composed the Bolsheviks' willing executioners. And the words of author Daniel Jonah Goldhagen, describing what he believed as the complicit attitude of the German population to the crimes of the Third Reich, and willingly participated in what are probably the greatest crimes in history committed against the Orthodox Christian population. On June 9th, 1919, Captain Montgomery Schuler of the American Expeditionary Forces to Russia telegrammed from Vladivostok on the makeup of the presiding Soviet government. There were 384 commissars, including 2 Negroes, 13 Russians, 15 Chinamen, 22 Armenians, and more than 300 Jews. Of the latter number, 264 had come to Russia from the United States since the downfall of the imperial government. How to summarize Jewish involvement in early communism? We have here concentrated on the Bolsheviks, the party that emerged victorious in the political struggle, even while the more socialist revivals, the Mensheviks, were overwhelmingly Jewish as well. Seth Frantzman, writing in the Jerusalem Post a century after the Bolshevik coup, observed that many Jews, quote, ended up being murdered by the system they helped create, unquote. He continued, this is a quote, with 100 years of hindsight, it is still difficult to understand what attracted so many Jews to communism in the Russian Empire. Were their actions infused with Jewishness, a sense of Jewish mission like that of Tikkun Olam, meaning roughly to repair the world, and light unto the nations, values we hear about today? Or were their actions strictly pragmatic as a minority group struggling to be part of a larger society? The answer lies somewhere in the middle. Mr. Frantzman is onto something. Their actions were infused with Jewishness, a sense of Jewish mission like that of Tikkun Olam. The reason that so many culturally adrift Jews gravitated to utopian communism was due to the cultural hangover of worldly messianism that imbues their erstwhile faith. Rabbinic Judaism has for centuries envisioned a conquering Messiah in the vein of King David or Simon Bar Kokhba, the leader of the disastrous revolt against Rome in 132 through 136 AD, who would emerge to crush the enemies of Jewry and usher in a new realm of peace, prosperity, and global harmony with the Jews and pride of place. Communism was a secularized version of Judaic messianism, conceived by the covert Jew Karl Marx, which, like all such efforts since the time of Bar Kokhba, would end in catastrophe, both for its immediate Christian victims as well as for its Jewish perpetrators. The current efforts to bring about a one-world order through globalization are yet other variations on a theme. Mr. Spencer's own answer regarding Jewish involvement in Russia and international communism comes across as remarkably facile. It must be granted that many Jews, particularly in Russia, did join the ranks of the communists, hoping that they would create a society in which they would be relieved of the second-class status and periodic pogroms they had suffered under the rule of the czars. This was far, however, from establishing that Bolshevism was a Jewish movement devised in order to advance Jewish aims, any more than that the preponderance of Black Americans in the National Basketball Association means that professional basketball is an inherently Black enterprise. A culture that values learning and scholarship will fill the ranks of movements that are intellectual in scope or that require intellectual labor. And that is true not just in politics, but in numerous other fields as well. That is a quote from Robert Spencer trying to explain why there is Jewish overrepresentation. Murderous communism versus professional basketball. According to Mr. Spencer, because Jewish cultural values or culture values learning and scholarship, it was natural for so many Jews to become party officials, commissars, agents, and secret police, informers, and general executioners of so many innocent Russian Christians in the hopes of creating a better society. Is that really what he would have us to believe Jewish culture logically produces? Jews in contemporary life. Mr. Spencer provides a similar apologia for Jewish domination or in other areas of contemporary life. Just as Jews became bankers and financiers when the Roman Catholic Church's prohibition on usury closed those fields to Catholics, so also the wider society's disdain for pornography tended to make it a field to which those who were marginalized and often treated as outcasts gravitated, and some Jews got involved in it. The Jews culturally cultivated creativity and dynamism, led to their being despised and relegated as the margins of society. So that's Robert Spencer. Now, regarding pornography, as I mentioned earlier, don't forget Al Goldstein, right? The former publisher of Screw, the pornographic sex newspaper. And he has the famous quote, as I told you guys earlier, in which asked why Jews are so overly represented in the porn industry, he answered, "The only reason that Jews are in the porn or are in pornography is that we think that Christ sucks. Catholicism sucks. We don't believe in authoritarianism." Interestingly enough, they believed in Bolshevism. Pornography thus becomes a way of defiling Christian culture. And as it penetrates into the very heart of the American mainstream and is no doubt consumed by those same very wasps, its subversive character becomes more charged. Interesting. It's not the Jews' fault that they slaughtered millions of Russian Christians or revolutionary Bolsheviks, became so adept at usury, became media barons, rose to the heights behind the scenes of political control, and went into pornography. Rather, it was the fault of Christian society and the result of the Jews' own superior ethic. With respect to being, quote, well represented in the financial sphere, Jews were just, quote, making lemonade out of lemons, according to Robert Spencer. This is a quote from Robert Spencer's book. If there are Jews at high levels of the pornography industry, this is not because they are Jews executing some subversive Jewish agenda, again, opposite of what Al Goldstein said, but because in that field, as in so many others, people who are intelligent, capable, motivated, and driven, all qualities that Jewish culture generally encourages, tend to rise to the top. It is clearly not acceptable by Mr. Spencer's standards to criticize Jewish culture. That would amount to anti-Semitism. But it is just fine to praise it to the heavens, even in the context of one of our greatest moral social blights, namely industrial scale pornography. Jewish pornographic entrepreneurs are not scarce on the ground. From the God-hating Al Goldstein, who Mr. Spencer describes as seeing himself as a victim of anti-Jewish prejudice and sees working in pornography as a way to strike back, to the rabbi attorney Solomon Friedman, the head of ALO, the parent company of Pornhub. Of course, Rabbi Friedman does not appear to see his efforts as destructive at all. Jews are well represented in contemporary pornography. Nathan Abrams has written an interesting article, Jews in the American Porn Industry, a disproportionate role in adult entertainment, the title of which pretty much sums it up. With regard to possible Talmudic sanction of child abuse, Mr. Spencer asks about pedophilia and child trafficking, which of course he denies. Whether elements of the Talmud permit child abuse is open to question. But certain contemporary problems in the Jewish state are not exactly reassuring of this source. For example, how Jewish American pedophiles hide from justice in Israel, apparently a widespread problem. Tens of thousands of pedophiles operate in Israel every year. And another article, Israel becoming a refuge for pedophiles, warns advocates for child sex abuse victims. Apparently, quote, there may be a significantly higher proportion of cases in the ultra-Orthodox community. Mr. Spencer affirms the obvious when he writes, quote, there are criminals and perverts in all cultures and groups. Obvious. But he denies that there is anything peculiar to Jewish culture that manifests, quote, a worldwide Jewish imperative to subvert and destroy non-Jewish society. That, of course, would be a difficult thing to establish beyond a reasonable doubt, though we have certainly seen that Judaism's holiest book, the Babylonian Talmud, is curiously anti-Christian, that Rabbinic Judaism takes pride in the judicial murder of Christianity's holiest person, that Jews were overwhelmingly represented in murderous anti-Christian Bolshevism, the crimes of which in absolute numbers dwarf even those of the criminal German National Socialists. The Jews have, quote, a disproportionate role in the contemporary pornography industry. One is even tempted to reference the significant roles Jews played in organized crime. Jewish American mobsters reference the Jewish American mobsters and organized crime figures. Jews in Christian society. Dr. E. Michael Jones, PhD, who may be found at culturewars.com as well as among the Anti-Defamation League's greatest hits, proffers an interesting theory in his immense book, The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit and Its Impact on World History. I do have that book. It is right over there. No, I have it right here. This is the book that he's referencing. If anybody is interested. Okay. Which much more accords with the bloody historical record of Jewish communism and the culturally subversive nature of Jewish involvement in pornography and other anti-Christian undertakings. Mr. Spencer gives Dr. Jones a modest hearing in his book. For example, this is Robert Spencer writing about E. Michael Jones. Rooted in nothing, radical Jews frequently seek to make others equally rootless by tearing down their religious, national, communal, and traditional allegiances. Such Jews carry on the traditional Jewish hatred of false gods, including, one supposes, Christian idolaters, but without offering anything. This is him quoting E. Michael Jones in his book. Without offering anything to replace the scorned allegiances. Rather, the most important result of the domination of non-Jewish Jews in these fields is their war on traditional values. Porn is just one expression of this rebellion against standards, against the disciplined life of obedience to Torah that makes a Jew living Judaism. That was Jones as quoted in Spencer's book, Antisemitism. When Jews became or become emancipated from the straitjacket of rabbinic Judaism without converting to another faith such as Christianity, they take with them into the larger Christian society a rootlessness that many of them seek to translate to the larger culture. Should this be so surprising? Mr. Spencer sees it as a function of Jewish cultural superiority. Some traditional Christians, such as Jones, see it as a cultural subversion. To a great extent, they are in agreement. It is merely a question of perspective. If the rabbis were indeed proud of killing Jesus Christ, as Dr. Schaefer has told us, why should not their cultural errors be inclined toward destroying a culture based in his name? Such a lingering antipathy toward Christian culture may not constitute a massive, insidious Jewish plot, but a nonetheless real social and cultural antagonism for what remains in Christian society. Mr. Spencer himself remarks on the glee demonstrated by multiple contemporary rabbis who rejoice in the ongoing destruction and Islamization of Christian Europe. Jews should rejoice in the fact that Christian Europe is losing its identity as a punishment for what it did to us for hundreds of years while we were in exile. Now Europe is losing its identity in favor of another people and another religion, and there will be no remnants and survivors from the impurity of Christianity. which shed a lot of blood it won't be able to atone for. Rabbi Baruch Efrati of Ynet News on November 11th, 2012, as quoted in Robert Spencer's Antisemitism. The Messiah will only come when Edom, Europe, Christianity has totally fallen. So I ask you, is it good news that Muslims are invading Europe? It's excellent news. It means the coming of the Messiah. Excellent news. That's Rabbi David Toitu on YouTube. Mr. Spencer hastens to point out that the statement of a handful of individuals, however, does not make for a Jewish conspiracy, which is logically undeniable, but the cultural antipathy to what remains of Christian Europe is palpable. Mr. Spencer points to one other rabbi, David Rosen, who does not support his colleague's sentiments, proving evidently that rabbis can disagree. It is evident, however, that as Europe grows more Islamic due to immigration and higher birth rates among Muslim families, the situation for both Jews and Christians in Europe will continue to deteriorate, as Mr. Spencer has argued on various occasions. But one beneficiary is surely the Zionist movement and his notion that Jews in general should immigrate to the state of Israel. As Europe grows more dangerous for Jews, fleeing to the Jewish state grows relatively attractive, a significant point that Mr. Spencer fails to bring up. When it comes to analyzing possible Jewish motivations for anti-Christian social and political behavior, a major lacuna in Mr. Spencer's book is the absence of evolutionary psychologist Professor Kevin MacDonald, who approaches Jewish collective behavior clinically from a group evolutionary perspective, and whom we have had occasion to mention. His well-researched work, such as A People That Shall Dwell Alone, Judaism as a Group Evolutionary Strategy, Separation, Its Discontents Toward an Evolutionary Theory of Antisemitism, The Culture of Critique, an evolutionary analysis of Jewish involvement in the 20th century intellectual and political movements, Understanding Jewish Influence, and others, all Mr. Spencer sees fit to ignore. Professor MacDonald points out that the broad Jewish support for multiculturalism, with important exceptions such as the relatively new phenomenon of Jewish neoconservatism, functionally undermines the hitherto dominant Christian culture while providing the Jewish minority, with its greater cultural cohesion, social and political advantages, to take a crucial example, that of raising children. Moreover, traditional Western supports for high investment parenting were embedded in Christian religious ideology, and I suppose are difficult to achieve in a post-religious environment. Nevertheless, as Podhoretz notes, it is in fact the case that Jewish intellectuals, Jewish organizations like the AJ Congress, and Jewish-dominated organizations such as the ACLU have ridiculed Christian religious beliefs, attempted to undermine the strength of Christianity, or have led the fight for lifting restrictions on pornography. Further, we have seen that psychoanalysis as a Jewish-dominated intellectual movement has been a central component of this war on Gentile cultural supports for high-investment parenting. Whereas Jews, because of their powerful genetically influenced propensities for intelligence and high investment parenting, have been able to thrive within this cultural milieu, other sectors of the society have not. The result has been a widening gulf between the cultural successes of Jews and Gentiles, and a disaster for the society as a whole. That is Dr. MacDonald in his book, The Culture of Critique, page 328. There is little gainsaying Professor MacDonald's broad observations. Other significant works of contemporary, this is also Dr. MacDonald, other significant works of contemporary scholarship on Judaism are similarly absent from anti-Semitism. Or no, I'm sorry, this is next paragraph. For example, references to the works of Michael Hoffman, including Judaism's Strange Gods, his massive and exhaustively documented Judaism Discovered, and Adolf Hitler, Enemy of the German People, nowhere appear in his pages. While Mr. Spencer mentions various translations of the Talmud into languages accessible to Christian Europeans over the centuries and the ensuing controversies, he omits the most striking example, namely that Johann Andreas Eisenmenger, Judaism Unmasked, published and suppressed in the early 18th century in Frankfurt, perhaps because Eisenmenger had mastered Hebrew, Aramaic, and Yiddish, and thus was able to provide a highly scholarly critique of the Talmud as a vehicle for the conversion of Jews to Christianity. Mr. Spencer chose not to engage him. There is also no mention in anti-Semitism of the Judaic Kabbalah. See Michael Hoffman in Judaism Discovered. Anti-Semitism in Contemporary Jewish State. Turning to Zionism in the Jewish state, Mr. Spencer is especially worried about the rise of anti-Semitic sentiments since the Hamas attack on the state of Israel on October 7, 2023. Mr. Spencer takes to task, for example, quote, conservative journalist Elijah Schaffer for condemning the attack on the following day, but adding context. One, what Hamas did was evil. What Israel is doing to the Palestinians is evil. Both think each other are the terrorists. One is in an open air prison. Of course, most of the examples of anti-Semitism provided by Mr. Spencer are from Islamic activists who, as Mr. Spencer would hasten to point out, are inevitably anti-Semitic by virtue of being Muslims. He proceeds to observe, one would say accurately, that Jews and Israel occupy an outsized proportion of the world's attention, and a great deal of attention is negative. And in an apparently related vein, Christians warned me that ancient prophecies held that the Antichrist would arise from modern-day Israel. Antichrist, or conversely the Judaic Messiah, will most likely arise from within the region of the old Roman Empire, namely the Euro-Mediterranean basin, and then move his capital to Jerusalem. Indeed, Churchill got to the heart of the matter when he opened his article, Zionism versus Bolshevism, with the words, some people like Jews and some people do not. But no thoughtful man can doubt that they are beyond all question the most formidable and the most remarkable race which has ever appeared in the world. In other words, Jews do and have for centuries, though especially now that there exists an explicit Jewish state, played an outsized role in world affairs, far exceeding their relatively small numbers. Churchill can see, in fact, Spencer can too, though he laments that, quote, a very great deal of that attention is negative. There are two logical possibilities for that negative attention. First, that the rest of the world labors under the disease of irrational Jew hatred, or what Spencer refers to as anti-Semitism. Or two, that Jews in the state of Israel are doing things that warrant negative attention. And the two, of course, are not mutually exclusive. Surely there are inveterate anti-Semites out there, especially in the Islamic world, but could possibly the state of Israel be acting badly itself? Is it anti-Semitic to entertain the idea? As of the publication of his book, Mr. Spencer regards Israeli military activity post-October 7th, 2023 as, quote, defensive. The state of Israel was attacked. It responded and will continue to respond. One might analogize the situation to the surprise Japanese attack of December 7th, 1941 against the U.S., or to the lunatic declaration of war by Germany a few days later in the ensuing American Allied response. Surely the United States was acting defensively? Surely, yes, though one can wonder about the subsequent targeting of civilians and civilian infrastructure that claimed the lives of millions of non-combatant Japanese and Germans. At the time, it seemed all in a good cause, but with hindsight, one hesitates to affirm that destroying German culture in the center of Dresden with incendiaries in 1945, or vaporizing the Japanese Christian center of Nagasaki in the same year, were categorically good. Similarly, one can raise questions at least about the behavior of the state of Israel before and after October 7, 2023. Mr. Spencer refers to the state of Israel as the, quote, most hated state in his title to chapter 12. We ask, why is it so hated? Is the entire world implacably anti-Semitic? Or are actions of the state of Israel in some way driving negative perceptions of it? Could not the latter be at least somewhat true? Mr. Spencer does not seem to think so. He marches out of a small parade of left-wing politicians, perennial critics of the Jewish state, to bolster his case. He does not engage more serious criticism like that of the American Jewish journalist Max Blumenthal, for example, who questioned the accepted narrative of October 7th and impressive documentary, Atrocity, Inc., Mr. Spencer also faults the previous Biden administration for insufficient support for Israeli policies in Gaza, even while Biden consistently gave the state of Israel just about everything it wanted in terms of munitions, money, and material, as well as vetoing UN Security Council resolutions against it. 100 times Biden supported Israel. What more was American policy supposed to do? Give the state of Israel nuclear weapons? No, it already has them. Mr. Spencer is also unhappy about the reported Palestinian death toll in the Israeli Gaza campaign, not because of the high number of fatalities, but because he regards the figures originating with the Hamas Ministry of Health as inherently unreliable. Would Hamas have an incentive to inflate the numbers? Presumably. It's just that Israeli intelligence has accepted them as generally accurate. Since the Vice article, Hamas numbers have, needless to say, changed, generally increasing, but sometimes declining. But Mr. Spencer takes it to be an indication of their unreliability. Whereas by actually downgrading their numbers from time to time, Hamas may be trying to retain some standard of accuracy and is willing to recognize when it has made a mistake. Still, quote, Israel's military has also accepted in briefings that overall Gaza casualty numbers are broadly reliable, unquote, as reported on March 24, 2025 by Reuters. Additionally, The Lancet reported that as of June 30th, 2024, total mortality in the Gaza Strip had been underreported by the Hamas Ministry of Health by 41%. Even the arch-Zionist President Donald Trump acknowledged that Gaza looked like a demolition site following the Israeli campaign in 2023 and 24. The very real problem of the fog of war, in which it is almost impossible to determine with accuracy total casualties, fatalities, and who particularly has been killed while combat operations are underway or just recently halted, seems lost on Mr. Spencer. Another relevant fact is that of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, chief proponent of the Gaza war, currently on trial for corruption again, has been indicted for war crimes by the International Criminal Court, along with his former defense minister, Yoav Gallant. Mr. Spencer, who regards the United Nations as anti-Semitic, no doubt would classify the ICC along the same lines, though he makes no mention. Part of the indictment against the two Israeli ministers pertained to a speech given by Mr. Netanyahu on October 28th, 2023, in which the prime minister invoked the memory of Amalek, mentioned in various places in the Tanakh, but especially in Deuteronomy, in which God instructs the Israelites to blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven, Deuteronomy 25:19. For crimes against the Hebrews and the Amaleks he committed, Amaleks had committed. Mr. Spencer is able to produce numerous accounts of Muslim preachers and activists calling for, in some way, to blot out the remembrance of the Jewish state and Jews generally, but he overlooks a comparable case prominent on the international scene when it involves the Israeli prime minister. Was Mr. Netanyahu calling for ethnic cleansing of the Gaza Palestinians? Certainly, evidence has surfaced that ethnic cleansing has occurred in Gaza, as reported by Human Rights Watch and Doctors Without Borders. Mr. Netanyahu's imprecation sounds not far removed from the passages of the Haggadah recited by observant Jews every Passover. It reads, "Pour out your wrath upon the nations that do not acknowledge you, and upon the kingdoms that do not call upon your name, for they have devoured Jacob and laid waste his habitation. Pour out your indignation upon them, and let the wrath of your anger overtake them. Pursue them with anger and destroy them from beneath the heavens of the Lord." Mr. Spencer acknowledges the Talmudic injunction, kill the best of the Gentiles in time of war. Perhaps that is what the state of Israel is doing. But if indeed God has given Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, to modern-day Zionist Jews, then one can wonder what the God-given boundaries of the Jewish state are really supposed to be. Those outlined in the UN in 1947, those created by facts on the ground, unquote, since 1967, or something else. The biblical boundaries of Eretz Yisrael are clearly open to interpretation, but at least some Zionist groups, both within and without the Jewish state, see those ostensibly God-given boundaries as very expansive indeed, stretching from the Nile River to Egypt, through the Euphrates River to Iraq, including much of Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and even Saudi Arabia. If indeed the Greater Israel Project is a serious one, the future implications for the Jewish state, its greatest ally, the United States, as well as the Middle East in general, are profound and disturbing. One can easily foresee a continued string of Middle Eastern wars waged on various pretenses to expand the Jewish state to its, quote, rightful frontiers, all done in the name of God, the most hazardous of political motivations, lawfare and anti-Semitism. As we approach the end of this exercise, let us pull back and make a general observation. One of the characteristics of totalitarian regimes, as observed by the great German-American political scientist Erich Vogelin, who narrowly escaped the Gestapo in Vienna in 1938, is the prohibition of questions. That there are certain questions that simply cannot be asked because they strike at the heart of the regime's unspoken assumptions. For a start, on the prolific Vogelin, one recommends his small volumes, The New Science of Politics, an introduction, and a second, Science, Politics, and Gnosticism. While we can remain grateful that freedom of thought and speech continue to endure in the West, one hesitates to say thrive, and especially in the United States, thanks to its explicit constitutional protections, it also is evident that our culture is sliding perceptibly towards repression. For the case of contemporary Britain, see jonathanturley.org. Even Mr. Spencer has been the victim of restrictions of freedom of speech on multiple occasions. In 2013, he was denied entry into the United Kingdom on the grounds of his outspoken anti-Islamic views regarding the violent nature of Islam and the social political threat that Islamic immigration poses to the West. Mr. Spencer is spot on, and that so many should dismiss him and others who hold comparable views, including this author, as Islamophobes is both unfair and harmful to the exchange of ideas. Yet, as the saying goes, what is good for the goose is good for the gander. It is evident that serious critical analysis of Judaism and Jewish history are, in the contemporary Anglosphere, largely forbidden areas that the prevailing cultural and intellectual atmosphere simply reject out of hand. One may not do it in polite society, else one reflexively attracts the epithet Antisemite and forfeits whatever social and professional standing one might have. And indeed, the Overton window seems to be closing further, moving from the realm of social peccadillos to the political repression. We must now observe that in the United States, a campaign is afoot to codify offenses of, quote, anti-Semitism by way of federal legislation and or presidential executive order. Already, green card holders are in jeopardy of deportation for the expression of views hostile to the state of Israel. Now, the, quote, U.S. administration argues it can deport a prominent anti-Israeli activist over his beliefs. The pending Antisemitism Awareness Act makes it tortuous way through the U.S. Congress would render the International Holocaust Remembrance Agency's a working definition of anti-Semitism currently an unofficial guideline into law for U.S. citizens. And that definition is anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community, institutions, and religious facilities. Thus, a certain person which may be expressed, or a certain perception which may be expressed, i.e. a state of mind, an Orwellian accusation against which one would have no practical defense, could result in federal government action on the basis of anti-discrimination. The Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, which targets colleges and universities under Title IX of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, though who knows how broadly it might be applied, is expected to pass U.S. Congress by virtue of its Republican majorities and be signed into law by President Trump sometime in 2025. That such an egregious violation of the principles of freedom of thought and speech, as well as those of the First Amendment itself, is seriously being considered in contemporary America. is a testament to how far down the slippery slope of Vogelin's totalitarian prohibition of questions we have fallen. Interestingly, and to their great credit, numerous Jewish scholars have taken a stand against the imposition of IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. Still, with the way things are going, one wonders if in 10 years' time, anti-Semitism will be as much a criminal offense in the United States as it was once in communist Russia. One does not hear from Mr. Spencer regarding the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act in his book. Perhaps he has chimed in elsewhere. We can hope that, having suffered from campaigns to silence him on Islam, he will lend his voice to those committed to freedom of thought and speech on the matter of anti-Semitism, out of principle, at least. Yet when one reflects on the sheer demonstrated power of America's enormous Judeo-Zionist lobby, including the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, the United Democracy Project, and the American Israeli Education Foundation, let alone the string of influential private Jewish political donors such as the Adelson family, the Schwartzman family, Donald Sussman, the Simons family, Michael Bloomberg, etc., all of which collectively pour hundreds of millions of dollars or more into an election cycle, one can feel the noose tightening. The general message of Goldberg's 1996 book, Jewish Power Inside the American Jewish Establishment, is that American Judaism is well organized and lavishly funded. It has achieved a great deal of power, and it has been successful in achieving its interest. Fighting that kind of crowd is, as the saying goes, bad for business. Jews contribute between 1/3 and 1/2 of all campaign money in federal elections, the donations motivated by Israel and the broader Jewish agenda. Goldberg, 1996. Jews are thus overrepresented in campaign contributions by a factor of at least 13 based on their percentage of the population, and are overrepresented by a factor of approximately 6.5 if adjustment is made for their higher average income. One has to ponder the direction in which matters have evolved since Professor MacDonald, writing over 20 years ago and relying on research from prior decades, affirmed his conclusions. Before Google, Facebook, and Amazon came into their own, having come to the end of anti-Semitism, one hopes that one will still be able to make such observations going forward without being punished. One remains optimistic after all. This isn't Spain. This is England. Concluding observations. Jew hatred is as old as Judaism itself. It has persisted for centuries. It will not end, laments Mr. Spencer. It is a social contagion, says Mr. Spencer. Apparently, even he doubts the convincing power of his book. He proceeds to observe, quote, against social contagions, rational argumentation is only of limited value. Indeed, by the end of his book, Antisemitism, one has the impression that Mr. Spencer has just about given up on rational argument. Would he in turn support coercive measures such as the Federal Task Force to combat anti-Semitism and the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act to meet the, quote, contagion of anti-Semitism? One wonders. For contemporary critics of the policies of the State of Israel and for analysis of Judaism itself, there may be precious little breathing room left in the coming years. Still, we will here reaffirm that anti-Semitism, or for that matter, hatred of anybody, violates the Orthodox Christian directive to love all people regardless of who they are, even while, as Orthodox Christian, we must persistently affirm the truth of our faith and stand up for what we believe, in particular, the sanctity of Jesus Christ and the most holy Theotokos, whenever they are attacked by followers of the Talmud or by anyone else. Yet, despite the weaknesses of anti-Semitism, the book, the fact remains that so much of Mr. Spencer's other work has been bold, thoughtful, and important, especially regarding Islam. His jihadwatch.org is an outstanding resource for learning about Islam and jihad in our time, especially in regions such as Asia and Africa, which receive scant attention in the Western press. But by the end of Mr. Spencer's book, we are still in the dark about why of anti-Semitism. Why has virtually every culture that has come into contact with Jews and Judaism at some point reacted with hostility? What is the overarching common denominator across cultures, times, and civilizations? What would Occam's razor tell us? Is it possible to point out that the common factor is Jews and Judaism themselves? Could that have something to do with it? Or would that just be another anti-Semitic remark to be dropped down the memory hole along with the observing the anti-Christian contents of the Talmud, the Jewish role in the massive crimes of early communism, God's rebukes of the ancient Israelites through Moses and the prophets, the Lord Jesus Christ's excoriation of the rabbinic leadership, the warnings of Orthodox Christian luminaries such as St. Paul and St. John Chrysostom, etc.? By the end of Robert Spencer's book, Antisemitism, History and Myth, we still do not know. So that right there, guys, that is the article, Is God an Anti-Semite? By G.M. Davis. As I said, it was a great article. I know it was a long reading today, but I thought it was worth sharing with you guys. So what are your guys' thoughts on all that? Someone says, good deductive reasoning. Fair enough. Based article. Yeah. Great article. Agathis says, wow, I feel enlightened. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Let me check into some of the super chats here and see what we got. It looks like I got a handful of you guys trying to let me know that I was muted. MGM Studies says no audio. Average Redhead said it's always the best segments that get muted. Well, I'll tell you what, whatever got muted me, that was not on me. That was not Boomer Tech issues, guys. That was YouTube. YouTube, they are preventing me from setting a super chat goal for today's stream. The last one I did on What is a Jew, Facebook immediately deleted and wouldn't let me stream on Facebook. Not that I care, or there's many people that watch me on Facebook, but they took that down as soon as I posted it on Facebook. And I just had a feeling that something fishy was going to happen with today's stream just because the title. And I noticed right as soon as I clicked live on the stream, everything looked normal. But as soon as I clicked live, it just was weird how the live stream was reacting, like here in YouTube Studio. And as soon as I clicked on goal, like never has happened before in my life using it, but it's just blank. You click goal and it's just blank and it doesn't allow you to set any super chat goal or description. So I'm sure it has something to do with the title of today's stream, Is God an Anti-Semite? So it is what it is. Kapow, you have no sound. Thank you very much for the $5. Thank you guys for trying to bring it to my attention. You've muted for a few minutes now. Thanking Austin. Really appreciate it. Nathan Slippery, shout out Codal crew member. Bagel attack. Yeah. Something happened there. And then when it was muted, I'm looking here on StreamYard. Everything is fine. Everything is as normal. And I just sat here not reading my article, and all of a sudden the audio comes back. Very, very strange. Mongoloid throws in 5, says, laugh out loud. The Larry Wheels, Andre Samuel video and recommended tab. That dude's a monster. W stream tonight. Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Thanks for the support. Oh, and he throws in another 10. Thank you so much, brother. He says, Star of David. Never heard of it, mate. I've heard of something about the Star of Remphan, though. Or was it the black cube of Saturn, Baal, Moloch, and Kronos? I forget. Might have been Inso. Yeah, I was actually thinking about maybe once I get back from Nashville and Florida, doing a stream on like Saturnian spirituality, looking at the worship of Saturn and ancient paganism, theories about the Kaaba stone and what that was dedicated to before, the rise of Islam and Muhammad. I think that might be an interesting stream to actually do. First Person Q gifted a Codal crew membership. Thank you so much, First Person. God bless you, bro. Thank you very much, Average Redhead, as well, for gifting a Codal crew membership. Bill Hicks, thank you very much, brother. Really appreciate you guys. DC throws in $2. Thank you very much, DC. And Lockstep throws in 5, says, very interesting stuff, Doc. I've never really thought of this question before, but I feel like it was somewhere in the back of my mind. I'll share. Well, thank you. Well, as you know, for some reason, look at this video. If you are still live with me, see if you have the share button. Multiple people, again, and I said, as soon as I went live, weird things were happening on the stream. Multiple people said that the share button is totally gone from YouTube. Do you guys have the share button? I'm curious. In the chat, let me know. Is the share button gone or is it still there? Oh, first person Q has the share button. Okay, good. Maybe things are back to normal. Octavian throws in $20 over on Dono Chat, says 20 shekels for a great stream. Thank you, DPH. Well, thank you, Octavian, for the support, man. I appreciate it. Yeah. Pat Fussy says, I don't. Crispy doesn't. Some people got it. Huh. Cool. Interesting. Maybe once it muted me, maybe the algo restarted or something. I don't know. That's weird. Anyways, Octavian, thank you so much for the $20, bro. Really appreciate it. Let me check Streamlabs. All right, over on Streamlabs, Taylor throws in $3, says, because of rabbinic Judaism and Protestantism, I sincerely believe that Jews and evangelical Christians will be primed to call God an anti-Semite at the time of judgment and the eschaton when the truth about all things are revealed. Well, I mean, you just think about, as we talked about in the last stream, the correlation between Jewish eschatology and Orthodox eschatology, and we highlighted that they are essentially total inversions of each other. And, you know, the Messiah they're waiting for is our Antichrist. So, in a sense, yeah, we worship God's Son. And those who worship the opposite of God's Son certainly can't be deemed of grace in the eyes of God. I mean, that seems to not make any sense. So they'd be primed to call God an anti-Semite at the time of judgment and the eschaton when the truth about all things is revealed. True. Brian throws in 5 over on Streamlabs and says, there's a particularly interfering treatise. I think he meant interesting treatise from 1939, written by Russian turned American Jew Rabbi Harry Watton. It's called A Program for the Jews. In it, he dismisses German Nazism as an inferior imitation of Judaism. Definitely or definitely a curious read. I have not heard of that, but I'm going to save it right now. Rabbi Harry Watton. Let's look it up if everybody's with me real quick. This is what he's saying. Rabbi Harry Watton, A Program for the Jews. Oh, here we go. Let's go to archive. Interesting. I'll have to check this out. I am not familiar with this work, but thank you, Brian, for bringing it to my attention. I do appreciate that, my man. Interesting. Okay. Brendan throws in 3 over on Streamlabs and says, Alexander McCall has an excellent case study and critique of Judaism in his landmark book, The Talmud Tested, where he exhaustively compares and contrasts Talmudic teachings against the law of Moses and the Torah. Never heard of that book either. The Talmud Tested. Oh, interesting. All right. Well, thank you very much, Brendan, for that. That was another little read I was not aware of. Okay. Interesting. All right, guys. Well, I need to get off here because I got to get ready. I got to get my clothes ready. I got to pack. We got to have all our stuff together for tomorrow. and be driving down to Nashville to see everybody at DebateCon. Are any of you guys here in the live chat? Any of you guys going to DebateCon? Am I going to be able to meet any of you guys in Florida or Nashville? Moji will not be there. Okay. Later, Akathis. God bless, brother. No Florida wedding stuff. Oh, Austin Tertulio's going. Austin, dude, we'll be able to meet each other. Are you going to Nashville or are you going to Florida? DC says nope, but he'll watch the debates when they're posted. Okay. Well, it sounds like Austin. Oh, Austin will be in Nashville. Nice, bro. Nice. Be fun to meet up in person. Outstanding work. Glad I found your channel. Well, thank you very much, Kevin. Really appreciate it. What's the event in Florida? It's the Athens and Jerusalem conference. In fact, I need to finalize my speech. I have an idea of everything I was going to talk about, but I haven't sat down and actually structured out my speech yet. I still got to do that. I'll tell you what, for some reason when I do speeches, I'm a procrastinator. Like I'll have my whole thing in my head, but I procrastinate till the last minute of actually writing down and organizing my speech for some reason. So, okay, Average Redhead's going to be at Florida. Awesome, dude. I'll be able to meet you. I don't know if you're a woman or man, Average Redhead, but great to have you here in the Kodo crew, Kevin Bacon. Oh, it sounds like Bill Hicks knows Kevin Bacon and Bill Hicks know each other. I'm not surprised. Two famous celebrities. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to get out of here. Thank you all so much for the support. God bless you all. Smash that like. And I'll probably end up cutting out that whole argument or the whole article of today's video and just upload that as a clip unto itself. Yeah, exactly. Kevin Bacon and Bill Hicks are both in our chat, guys. We finally made it. Kodal has finally made it. I finally made it. Austin, tell DPH I said to make you a mod. Oh yeah, dude. Austin, you should be a mod. Austin, I'll make you a mod, dude. I just had somebody in the mods was like banning Orthodox people they had problems with. I got to figure out. I have too many mods. Someone who's a mod went sabotage, like scorched earth on a handful of like regular supporters. I had people that regularly super chat be like, yeah, I'm banned from your chat. I'm like, what? And they were. So somebody, I don't know if it's Crispy. I doubt it's Crispy, but somebody who's a mod has like banned a bunch of freaking people. All right. Mod Civil War. Yeah, pretty much. All right, guys. Like I said, I will be posting clips for the next week. I'm going to be gone. Nashville, Florida. I might be able to do a live stream talking about DebateCon or stuff like that once I get down to Florida, but no live streams for at least 11 days. No live stream for 11 days. So I will see you guys when I get back, and I promise you I got so much good content to put together and put out. So I'm really excited to just get back and get to work. But thank you all for being here. Please smash that like. And a major thank you to everybody who supported today financially. God bless you all. I really appreciate it. I wouldn't be able to do this, without your guys' support. So thank you very, very much from the bottom of my heart. God bless you guys. I love you. And so with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next one. As always, until then, God bless.